Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Max Carter. I'm 34 years old, and this happened in April of 2023. Even now, recalling it makes my skin crawl. I swear every word is true, at least as I experienced it. The people and events here are forever burned into my mind no matter what anybody else says, and I've heard a lot of doubts, especially from the authorities who insisted there was no proof that anyone accompanied me into Devil's Hammock. I know what I saw, and I wish I could forget. I'm a freelance illustrator by trade. I live alone, unless you count my dog, Boone, who's always been my shadow. I had intended to spend a few peaceful days in nature to clear my head after a brutal divorce and months of professional burnout. Devil's Hammock Wildlife Management Area in Levy County, Florida, caught my eye for two reasons. The name, I've always been drawn to ominous-sounding places, and its remoteness. It's about 50,000 acres of swamp and forest where you can truly feel cut off from the rest of the world. At the time, that was exactly what I wanted. Arrival and setup. I drove in on a Thursday morning, excited in that fluttery, anxious way you get when visiting somewhere new. The roads quickly turned from paved to gravel, then from gravel to packed mud, then eventually to two-lane dirt that kicked dust into the trees. I followed a hand-drawn map I'd printed out from an online forum, which promised to show a scenic route to a little clearing where people sometimes camped. I also planned to meet up with Matt and Claire Jennings, who had texted me that they'd be coming late that evening. They were cousins of mine, though more distant cousins, the kind you see once a year. Matt was a big talker, always touting conspiracy theories and local ghost stories. Claire was more grounded, a geology grad student who liked to camp. They heard me mention I'd be heading into the hammock and asked to tag along. I didn't mind. I figured it might be nice to have a little company. Boone, my German shepherd, rode shotgun, panting happily with his nose out the cracked window. The Florida sun in April was warm, but not yet scorching. I found the small clearing around noon. It was just big enough for a couple of tents, ringed by cypress and pine trees weeping Spanish moss. There were no marked trails near the site, no official facilities. This is the kind of place you only find through local rumor or obscure websites. In short, it was perfect for me. I hopped out, let Boone sniff around, then started setting up camp, a small dome tent, my cooler, a foldable table, and a portable solar charger for my phone. The hush of the forest felt soothing, until I noticed that the hush was total. No birdsong, no insects, just a dull blanket of silence. It didn't startle me enough to leave. I'd been looking for solitude, and I was getting exactly that. Still, an itch of unease lingered. Oddities begin. An hour later, as I was unloading my gear, Boone stiffened and let out a low growl. He usually only does that when a stranger walks by our fence at home. I followed his gaze into the cypress stands and saw nothing, not a single person or animal. But the hair along his neck bristled, and he refused to move from that spot, just baring his teeth at some invisible thing. For a moment I caught a strange odor, like sulfur or hot electronics. Then it was gone, and Boone settled. We resumed camp life as though nothing had happened. I spent the rest of the afternoon wandering within a quarter-mile of camp, collecting some dead branches for the fire, snapping reference photos for my sketches. I'm not a survival expert by any means, but I've done enough camping to handle the basics. The plan was to stay 3 nights. Matt and Claire had told me they'd arrive after sundown. They were the sort of folks who rarely run on schedule, but I expected them around 8 or 9 p.m. Something was off, though. My phone's battery drained more quickly than usual, going from 85% to 20% within 2 hours, even though it was on airplane mode. My GPS app, which I'd loaded with offline maps, kept glitching, jumping my location around by miles, as if I was teleporting all over the county. I chalked it up to a faulty satellite connection. Maybe the heavy tree cover messed with the signal. As twilight settled in, I tried starting a fire. The wood was dry, the tinder was good, and I used both matches and a lighter. But nothing would catch. I finally splashed a bit of lighter fluid on the twigs, and only then did the flames sputter to life. Strangely, the firelight glowed with a faintly greenish tinge. I told myself it must be some mineral in the wood. To be honest, I had no better explanation. Night closed over the hammock, turning my little fire ring into an oasis of warmth in the otherwise chilled darkness. The moon wasn't bright, but enough silver light filtered through the trees to illuminate the Spanish moss swaying overhead. Every so often, a breeze came through, but it felt less like nature, and more like the forest was exhaling on me. I heard a distant rumble. Matt's truck, hopefully. Checking my phone, I saw it was almost 10 p.m., just as I started wondering if they'd gotten lost. A set of headlights bobbed along the dirt road. I whistled. Boone bolted to the edge of the clearing, tail wagging. Sure enough, the pickup squeaked into the clearing. Matt hopped out first. Messy blonde hair, a wide grin, the posture of someone who's both cocky and permanently excited. Claire followed, carefully stepping out, smoothing her dark ponytail. She had a stoic vibe about her, but there was always a spark of curiosity in her eyes. They each came with big backpacks stuffed to the brim, plus some gear in the truck. I helped them set up their own tents, swapped some updates about life. Matt asked if I'd seen anything freaky yet. I joked that the only freaky thing was how stubborn the fire was, and how my phone battery was draining. "Dude, the phone's no big deal," Matt said. "That's normal in places like this, right? High electromagnetic fields or something." I shrugged. "Sure, maybe. So, how was the drive-in?" "We got lost for an hour," Claire answered, rummaging for her tent stakes. "That's why we're late. The road signs don't match the map. At one point, the GPS told us we were in Georgia. Then, half a mile later, it said we were back in Florida." She laughed, but it was nervous. "I thought we might never find you." I smiled at them, told them I was just glad they made it. We settled around my not-so-impressive fire and roasted some canned hot dogs. Matt shared his grand plan. Tomorrow, we'd venture deeper into the hammock, following some unmarked trails he'd read about on a conspiracy forum. He insisted on searching for evidence of a local cryptid or ghost story, something about the ghost of a child luring people off the paths. Claire rolled her eyes, but she was game to explore for the fun of it. Eventually, we all turned in, with the plan to start early the next morning. The first night. I crawled into my sleeping bag with Boone at my side. Even in a tent, the Florida night can get cold, but I like that chill. It didn't take long for me to drift off. I had half-lucid dreams of swirling mist and tiny footprints around my campfire. A child's voice saying my name, "Max, Max." Suddenly, Boone started barking. I jolted awake in the darkness. My watch read 2 a.m. I unzipped the tent flap and peered out. The fire was out, only the faint glow of embers. The clearing was pitch black aside from the distant stars. I saw no sign of Matt or Claire. I listened for footsteps or branches snapping, but there was nothing. Just the wind in the cypress. Boone lowered his ears, huffing. He barked again, but with less certainty, like he'd lost track of whatever triggered him. I tried to reassure him. Eventually, we both drifted back to a fitful sleep. Day 2, glitches in reality. Morning broke with a watery sun peeking through the canopy. I eased out of the tent, half expecting to find the world rearranged. Matt and Claire were already up, boiling coffee on a tiny camp stove. They said they'd slept all right, though Claire admitted she woke around 1 a.m. to see the sky flickering with green streaks, almost like a faint aurora. Matt teased her about becoming a believer. We decided to have breakfast and set off hiking. The plan was to do a loop that Matt had found on some obscure site. Apparently it was once a trapper's trail. Could be interesting, I thought. "Let's keep it within 10 miles, though," I said. "I'd like to be back before dark." Claire nodded. "Me too." We grabbed our day packs. I left my big pack in the tent but brought my phone, solar charger, a physical map Claire had, and some snacks and water. Matt had a sidearm in a holster on his belt. He bragged he never went into the wild without it. I wasn't sure how well he maintained or knew how to use it, but the mere presence of a gun gave him confidence. Boone stayed close to me, alert. Usually on these trips he'd sprint around sniffing at everything, but this time he kept circling back to my side as though on guard. We found a faint trail leading north. The cypress swamps around us gave way to pine flatwoods, the ground crunchy with needles. Every so often, we spotted half-sunken footprints or animal tracks, though some looked strange, like a child's footprints but older and smaller than normal. Matt claimed they were raccoon prints, but I wasn't convinced. They were too round, too evenly spaced. After we'd walked for maybe 3 hours, we decided to break. Claire checked her map and Matt tried to verify our location on his phone. No luck. His phone displayed random coordinates that didn't match anywhere near Devil's Hammock. Claire's compass pointed north, but whenever we walked in that direction, the overhead sun seemed to suggest we were going west. We started to wonder if the place was messing with our sense of direction. "There could be iron deposits in the soil," Claire said. "Enough to throw off the compass. It happens." I didn't argue. We kept going until we reached a shallow creek. Too shallow to wade, but thick with leaf sludge and algae. On the far bank stood a rickety footbridge. It looked ready to collapse at any second. Matt decided to be the guinea pig, stepping onto the boards. He made it across with minimal trouble, and Claire followed. Boone refused, whining at me. I coaxed him forward, and we hurried across. Midway, the boards creaked so loud I thought they'd shatter. But we all got safely to the other side. We never should have crossed that creek, because the second our boots hit the far side, we heard a child's voice. Clear as day, it said, "Help me." We froze. The voice came from somewhere to our right, deep in the cypress. Matt looked thrilled, like a ghost hunter who'd just scored an EVP. Claire looked alarmed. I felt a pit form in my stomach. My first instinct was to call out. "Hey, who's there?" I shouted. "Are you hurt?" No response, just the faint sloshing of water. We waited, straining our ears. Then the voice came again, quieter. "Help me, I'm stuck." Matt, ignoring every survival rule, started pushing through the thick brush in the direction of the sound. I followed, my heart pounding. If there really was a lost kid out here, we had to help. Claire came behind me, cautioning that this could be a trap. Maybe some unsavory people were using a child's voice to lure travelers. But we couldn't just leave. We found nothing. No child, no footprints, only a bog that smelled like rotting eggs. The voice didn't speak again. Boone kept growling at the empty air. After a tense half hour of searching, we gave up, unsettled. Matt looked disappointed, or maybe spooked, like he'd expected a ghost child, but was rattled to hear it so vividly. It was late afternoon by the time we backtracked to the footbridge. Except the footbridge wasn't there anymore. Where we'd crossed, we saw only broken boards scattered in the creek, half submerged. The rope handrail was twisted around a cypress trunk on the far side. We had to cross the creek barefoot, sinking to our calves in slimy mud. It was as if time had accelerated in that one spot, rotting the wooden boards all at once. Back at camp. By the time we returned to camp, the sky was darkening. I checked my watch. It read 3:52 p.m., but the sky looked like 6 or 7 p.m. The entire day seemed off kilter, like the sun was moving too quickly. A mild sense of unreality settled over me. Claire tried to get a reading with her compass again, only to see the needle spinning slowly counterclockwise. At camp, we found the ring of stones around our fire was rearranged, almost decorative, with each rock balanced precariously on top of another. Our backpacks, which had been secured inside our tents, were gone. I tore open the flap to my tent and discovered they weren't actually gone. They were up in the trees right above our tents, hanging from branches about 20 feet high, each pack tied by its straps. "How the hell?" Claire started. "Who would do that?" Matt, frowning, insisted we must have done it ourselves and forgot. He'd sometimes spout nonsense like that whenever he felt a rational explanation might slip away. We had no rope, no ladder, and no desire to hoist our gear up there in the first place. Yet, somehow, there it was. Boone barked at the branches, as though scolding them. Claire demanded we get the packs down, so I boosted her up the trunk of the nearest pine. She managed to climb and toss one pack to Matt, who nearly dropped it. We collected all 3. Everything inside was soaked in muddy water. My extra clothes were soaked. My food supply was dripping with algae. Nothing made sense. We had zipped those packs closed inside the tent. Now they were drenched and reeked of stagnant swamp. Matt cursed. Claire silently took inventory, glaring at the near-ruined contents. We were too rattled for subtlety. Matt decided to shoot his gun into the air, hoping to scare away whoever might be messing with us. He fired a single shot. The sound cracked through the hammock, echoing for what felt like forever. But no one and nothing came running out. The forest swallowed the noise, leaving us with nothing but the rustle of leaves. Night came fast, and we struggled to get another fire going. The wood we'd collected earlier was green and damp, even though it had been dry that morning. Eventually, we got a small fire, huddling around it while we tried to salvage food. Most of our supplies were waterlogged. We managed to scrounge some jerky that was sealed in a plastic jar, plus a bag of chips. Claire had a couple of protein bars in her pockets. Not the dinner we'd planned, but it would do. Boone wouldn't eat or drink. He just stared into the trees, trembling occasionally. That unnerved me because he's usually a voracious eater. At one point, he started pacing the perimeter of our campsite, sniffing the ground like he was searching for something. He'd pause, hack up a low growl, then continue. I asked Matt, "Do you think there might be someone else out here messing with us? Some criminals or a local we pissed off by trespassing?" He shrugged. "Doesn't matter. I have the gun. Let them come." Claire shot him a withering look. "You realize they could be watching us right now. They took the packs from inside our tents. They're not afraid of us." We all fell quiet. The shadows cast by our weak fire flickered on the cypress trunks, forming shapes that looked vaguely human for half-seconds before melting into something else. I felt deeply uneasy, so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but also wired with adrenaline. Finally, around midnight, we retreated to our tents. Matt insisted he'd keep watch, though we doubted he'd stay awake. I crawled into my sleeping bag with Boone, who refused to lie still. For at least an hour he sat at the tent flap, staring out, occasionally letting out a little huff of warning. The second night, child in the clearing. I was half asleep when I heard a small, timid voice. "Help me. I'm lost." My eyes snapped open. Boone bared his teeth, nose almost pushing through the mesh of the tent door. I flicked on my flashlight. The voice was coming from the clearing. Outside, I heard Matt stirring, presumably from his own tent. A second later, I saw a silhouette. A small figure, maybe 4 feet tall, standing near where the fire had been. I scrambled for the tent zipper. When I emerged, flashlight in hand, the beam caught a boy. He looked about 6 or 7, barefoot, wearing ragged shorts and a shirt that might have once been white. He was deathly pale, with dark smudges around his eyes. His hair hung limp, dripping with water or some dark fluid. He stared at me, expressionless, then repeated, "Help me, I'm lost." He wasn't shouting or crying. He just spoke softly, as if reading lines off a page. That alone was unsettling. Then Boone started barking furiously. The boy didn't flinch. Matt unzipped his tent and pointed his flashlight at the child as well. "Kid, who are you?" he said, voice unsteady. Claire scrambled out of her tent, looking wide-eyed. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Where'd you come from? Are your parents here?" The boy blinked, but gave no answer. Instead, he quietly walked toward me, ignoring Boone's growls. I caught a glimpse of his feet. Small, pale, caked with mud. I half expected to see them rotting, but no, they were just dirty. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He coughed, and this hacking rasp filled the clearing. As if on cue, Boone started shaking uncontrollably, backing away, whimpering. My dog never did that. Something about the child overwhelmed him. Claire took a step forward and crouched gently. "It's okay," she said. "We're friendly. What's your name?" After a long pause, the boy said, "Eli." "Where's your family, Eli? Did you get lost out here?" But Eli didn't respond. Instead, he looked to Boone, then flicked his eyes back to me. His gaze felt ancient, far older than a 6-year-old's. Matt knelt near him, ignoring the dog's warning growls. "Hey, buddy, are you hurt?" he asked. Eli slowly shook his head, then coughed again. A bit of black fluid dribbled from the corner of his mouth. It wasn't thick enough to be tar or blood, more like watery ink. My flashlight caught it with an unnatural shine. I took a step back. I felt pure dread, though I couldn't rationalize why. I should have wanted to help the kid. Instead, some primal survival instinct in me was screaming to get away. The air smelled of sulfur again, like a burnt fuse. Then Eli took another step forward, closer to Boone, who was trembling and backing into my legs. Before I could stop him, Eli reached out and touched Boone's flank. My dog howled as if his fur was singed. He collapsed, limbs twitching in a violent seizure. I dropped to my knees, yelling Boone's name, trying to steady him. He foamed at the mouth, eyes rolling back. Claire let out a shriek, and Matt shot to his feet, reaching for his gun. Eli just stared, lips curving into the faintest smile. "Put your hands up," Matt shouted, voice cracking. He was pointing the pistol at this small, unmoving child. In that moment, it felt like the forest itself held its breath. Boone's seizure stopped. He lay still, panting. I checked him, tears burning my eyes. His heartbeat was rapid, but at least he was alive. Matt was still training the gun on Eli, who simply turned and began to walk away, deeper into the darkness. The boy didn't run, didn't hurry. He drifted on bare feet and was soon swallowed by the night. Matt didn't fire. Claire sank to the ground, her face pale as a sheet. I should have chased after that boy, but something in me was too frightened. An overriding sense that if I followed him, I'd never come back. Missing Matt. We huddled around the barely glowing coals of the fire, adrenaline spiking. Boone slowly came around, shaky but alive. I decided we needed to find help at first light. This was beyond bizarre. A child alone in these swamps, apparently able to incapacitate a dog by touch. Some primal logic in me whispered that this was no ordinary child at all. Matt was hyper, pacing, ranting about how we had to go after the boy, Eli, track him down, maybe put him out of his misery. That statement made me sick. Claire raised her voice at him. "You want to shoot a child?" Matt just shook his head, sweaty and wide-eyed. "He's not a kid. You saw what he did to Boone. Don't pretend that was normal. This place is messed up. We can't let him do that to us next." Claire insisted we should call the sheriff in the morning, or at least get back to the main road. Maybe we could flag down a ranger. I agreed. We'd pack up and leave at dawn. GPS or no GPS, we'd find a way out. Sleep was impossible. Instead, we watched the forest. But by 3 a.m., we were so exhausted that we dozed in shifts. I don't remember how long I slept, but I came to in a panic, arms feeling stiff from the cold. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Claire was stirring from her spot by the fire pit. Matt was gone. A wave of dread flooded me. Claire said she'd last seen him an hour before when he mumbled something about getting more firewood. She'd nodded off briefly, and now he wasn't back. We called his name repeatedly, our voices echoing. No response. We checked his tent, rummaged through the truck. Everything was the same. No sign of him except his gun was missing. Boone, though shaky, started sniffing around camp for Matt's scent. I was half terrified we'd find him dead in the swamp. Still, we had to look. Grabbing flashlights, we followed Boone's nose. Matt returns. Wrong. We spent a good hour combing the surrounding area, calling his name, searching for footprints on the damp ground. The forest was bleak and empty. The early morning light gave the Spanish moss a silvery hue, making it look like spectral banners overhead. Finally, as we circled back to the campsite, we found Matt. He walked out from behind a cluster of cypress, heading toward us. His clothes were soaked from the waist down, dripping. His boots squelched with each step. He wore a blank, faraway expression. He looked at Claire and me as if we were strangers. But then his lips curled into an overlong smile. "Hey," he said, in a voice that sounded too calm. "Where'd you guys go?" I felt my breath catch. "We've been looking for you. You vanished in the middle of the night." He cocked his head. "Oh, right, I was out there. Got turned around." Claire took a step closer, worry etched on her face. "Matt, are you okay?" He stared at her for a moment as if unsure who she was. Then he said slowly, "You're Claire, my cousin." His voice droned on each syllable, like he was practicing speech. A forced grin kept popping up on his face. He blinked less often than normal. I wanted to hug him, to confirm he was real, but something in me held back. The man in front of us had Matt's features, but he seemed drained or replaced. Boone let out a low growl, hackles raising. Matt looked down at Boone and gave a short chuckle that didn't sound like him at all. Then he locked eyes with me, and his pupils did this weird flicker, like an old TV losing signal. My skin prickled with fear. "You guys want to keep going deeper?" he asked. "We can find the boy, see how far the hammock goes." Claire responded gently. "No, Matt. We're going back to the main road. We need to leave." At that, Matt's jaw clenched, and for a split second his face contorted with rage. His voice dropped low. "Why would we do that?" As soon as he said it, that too broad smile reappeared. He shook his head, almost in a spasm, then rummaged around. I'm hungry," he said, like an afterthought. Claire gave me a frightened look. I whispered to her, "We'll pack up quickly. We'll figure out how to get him out of here." We stepped away to collect our gear from the tents. Matt wandered over to the smoldering ashes, poking them with a stick as though bored. 5 minutes later, while Claire and I stuffed our soggy gear into backpacks, I glanced over to see Matt pulling out his gun. For a moment, my heart seized. He pointed it at the ground, picked up a small piece of charcoal from the ashes, and used it to draw swirling designs on the gun's barrel. He seemed lost in the motion, repeating small circles in black soot. When we were ready, I approached him carefully. "All set, man. Let's get out of here." I tried to keep my tone casual. He stared at me blankly, then nodded. That was enough for me. I started leading the way back to the main road. We had no real idea where to go, just a direction we thought was east. Claire shouldered her pack, and I clipped Boone's leash on, not wanting him to run off, though he seemed reluctant to move. Matt trailed behind us, occasionally muttering under his breath. I caught bits of his murmurs. "He's under the bark, we're under the bark, more time under the trees than above." A bad turn. We walked for hours. The day felt thick, the air hot and stagnant. Boone kept pulling in the opposite direction, as if he'd rather go deeper into the forest. Maybe his sense of smell told him the main road was not the way we were going, or maybe something else compelled him. I tried to keep my eyes peeled for any sign of a real trail. At some point, Matt started giggling. No joke, soft giggles, like a child told a secret. Claire turned to me alarmed. "Matt," she said, "what's so funny?" He shook his head. "Nothing," he answered, that grin creeping up again. Then he stopped in his tracks, eyes going wide. "Wait, guys, look." We followed his gaze. Off to the side was a gnarled cypress with a huge hollow trunk. Matt rushed over to it as though magnetically drawn. I shouted for him to wait, but he ignored me. He dropped to his knees near the hollow, reached inside, then pulled something out. A child's shoe, ancient-looking. The canvas rotted. Without a word, he handed it to Claire. She recoiled. "I don't want that, Matt." He insisted, pressing it into her hand until she took it. Then he turned abruptly and kept walking. Claire looked at me, stony-faced, then tossed the shoe aside. "We need to get him help now." It was 2 more hours of stumbling through tangles of swamp, water up to our shins at times. Our sense of direction was hopelessly skewed. The terrain seemed to shift whenever we looked away. Fallen logs changed positions, streams meandered in circles. Even the sun overhead appeared to flicker in place, not crossing the sky normally. Eventually, we stumbled on a fire break, a straight path that must have been cut for controlling wildfires. It ran east-west, which was helpful. We decided to follow it east, hoping it would lead us to a main road. The vegetation parted, which made walking easier for about a mile. Then everything went to hell again. Matt's attack. Claire and I were marching ahead, discussing the possibility of searching for a watchtower or ranger station. Boone was lagging behind, occasionally sniffing side trails. Matt was behind all of us. Suddenly, I heard Claire yelp. I spun around to see Matt had grabbed her by the arm, forcibly pulling her off the fire break and into the thick brush. "Matt!" I roared, dropping Boone's leash and running back. Claire was struggling, half screaming. But Matt was surprisingly strong. He had his pistol pressed against her side and he was pulling her deeper into the dense trees. His eyes were wide, his grin locked. I tackled him from the side, knocking him away from Claire. The gun went skittering across the pine needles. Claire stumbled back, clutching her arm where bruises already bloomed. Matt fought me with feral strength, limbs thrashing in bizarre angles. He laughed in my face, spittle flying. "You don't get it," he snarled. "He's under the bark now, he's inside. You'll be with us soon." Boone jumped in, barking. Matt batted him away as though the dog weighed nothing. Terrified for my life, I wrestled him onto his back, pinning his wrists. Claire snatched the gun from the ground. Matt's laughter abruptly turned to an anguished wail, as though something inside him had broken. Then he bucked me off, his strength inhuman. For a moment, I was sure he'd kill me. But Boone lunged, teeth sinking into Matt's shoulder, which gave me time to scramble up and tackle him again. We subdued him together, dog and man, until he stopped fighting, lying limp and bloodied in the needles. Claire aimed the gun at him, tears streaming down her face. "What did you do?" she screamed. Matt just cackled. Then, in a horrifying lurch, he stood despite the dog's jaws and me pinning him. Blood poured from the bites in his arm, but he seemed unaffected. He cocked his head to the side, staring at Claire. His voice came out rasping as though forced through a tight throat. "We found the boy. You can't leave now. The bark grows under your skin. Doesn't it, Claire?" She fired a single shot at him in a blind panic. The bullet struck him low in the side because I yanked the barrel at the last second. Even then, the force knocked him back. He let out a guttural cry and collapsed. I shouted for Claire to stop as he hit the ground, gasping. She dropped the gun, horrified by her own action. I scrambled over to Matt, tried to see how badly he was hurt. Blood seeped through his shirt, but I didn't see an exit wound. He looked up at me, gurgling, eyes flicking around. His grin was gone, replaced by an expression of raw terror. For a moment, he sounded like himself again. "Max, help." "Oh God, it hurts," he said. Then his eyes rolled back and he let out an airy laugh that dissolved into a sigh. His body went limp. I felt for a pulse. Nothing. Matt was dead. Claire stood off to the side, shaking, hands over her mouth. I didn't mean to do that," she breathed. I tried to say something comforting, but no words would come. I was reeling. My cousin had basically gone insane, or been possessed, or some combination of the two. Now he was dead on the forest floor, shot by Claire in self-defense. My mind was screaming that none of this was possible. People don't just gain weird, inhuman strength. They don't vanish and reappear drenched in swamp water. They don't grin like marionettes. But there he was, a corpse, with no one around but me, Claire, and Boone. At first, we just sat there, shells of ourselves. Then, unbelievably, Matt twitched. I flinched so hard that I nearly fell over. But his body settled again, still lifeless. Maybe just a post-mortem spasm. The forest felt charged with static electricity like a storm about to break. I turned to Claire. "We can't stay here," I rasped. "We have to keep moving." She knelt next to Matt's body, tears streaking her face. She closed his vacant eyes. "Matt," she whispered, "I'm so sorry." Then, seemingly by reflex, she patted his pockets. She removed the extra bullets, some tissues, a small multi-tool. She took his wallet, presumably to give to family later. Staring at the gun on the ground, she scooped it up with shaking hands. With no time or tools to bury him, we decided to leave him there. It was a horrific choice, but we had no realistic option. The longer we lingered, the more I felt that swirling sense of doom creeping in. Claire and I half-heartedly covered his body with pine branches. An insufficient funeral for someone she'd loved and I'd known since we were kids. Time distortions. We trudged east along the firebreak, quiet and hollow. The sun overhead was bright, but my watch read only 10 a.m. My phone had died entirely, refusing to power on. Claire's phone was stuck on 12:06 a.m. with a glitching screen. The day progressed painfully, and yet the sky never shifted from its mid-morning glare. It felt like we were in a bizarre time loop. Boone limped along, trembling, occasionally letting out a frightened whine. He kept looking behind us as if he expected something or someone to follow. After what felt like hours of walking, We approached a slight rise in the land. Topping the hill, we saw a vision that made our hearts drop. Our camp clearing, right there in front of us. Same ring of stones, same burnt logs, as though we'd been walking in a circle. But that shouldn't have been possible following a straight fire break. We both stared in disbelief. Claire threw her pack down, letting out a broken sob. How are we back here? I had no answer. We hurried into the clearing, checking for signs of Matt's body. Of course, that was miles away, so there was no reason he'd be here. But I had a nauseating fear that maybe he would be. Instead, we found only our battered tents. They looked older, as if they'd been left out in the elements for months. The fabric had mold creeping up the sides. Our sleeping bags were lying on the ground, unzipped from the inside, as though they'd been used by people who left in a hurry. The food in our cooler was rotten, swarming with maggots. It had only been a day or two, but it looked like a year's worth of decay. "What's happening here?" Claire whispered. "Is time speeding up? Are we just stuck in some nightmare?" I felt tears threaten to surface. "I don't know," I said, voice shaking. "This place it isn't normal." I wanted so badly to comfort her, to be strong, but I couldn't pretend to understand any of this. Then I saw something that made my heart slam in my chest. My own sketchbook, which I'd left in my tent, lay open on the ground. The pages were covered in black, watery scribbles, like a child's frantic scrawl. The edges were warped, as if dipped in water. Some lines read, "Max Carter, help me, under the bark." I turned to Claire. "We need to get out, right now." She nodded, stepping away from the tents in horror. Her left hand clutched the gun so tightly her knuckles were white. We forced ourselves to keep walking east, ignoring the illusions around us. The forest felt heavier the further we went. It was as if the air was thick with invisible cobwebs, tugging at our limbs and minds. Hours seemed to pass, but the sun refused to budge from that mid-morning angle. My watch's hands kept ticking backward. Claire's end. Eventually, Claire stopped. She leaned against a tree, wincing. Her face was pale and shiny with sweat. I asked if she was hurt. She shook her head, but then she unzipped her jacket and showed me a deep splinter lodged along her side. It was from the scuffle with Matt. Possibly the wood had broken off in her skin when he pinned her. The area around it looked inflamed, with blackish veins creeping out. "Oh my God, Claire!" I tried to examine it, but she recoiled in pain. "That looks infected or something. We have to remove it." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. She grabbed the multi-tool she'd taken from Matt, handed it to me, and braced herself against a tree. As gently as I could, I sliced away part of her shirt and tried to pull the splinter free. It was buried deeper than I realized, and the tissue around it was almost spongy. The black veins throbbed. She shrieked when I managed to yank the wood out. It came out like a thin root, longer than I expected, dripping with a dark fluid that reeked of sewage. Claire nearly passed out, a wave of shock sweeping her face. I pressed a bandage from my kit onto the wound, tying it in place. She panted, tears in her eyes. It feels so cold," she whispered. She could barely walk. I half supported her as we continued onward. For maybe 20 minutes we made slow progress, but her steps became more unsteady. Finally, she collapsed. I lowered her to the ground and saw her eyes were unfocused. She looked at me, almost apologetically, then coughed up a dark sputum. My stomach twisted in horror. She was going septic or something even worse. "Claire, stay with me," I begged. I pressed the back of my hand to her forehead. She was feverish and cold at the same time, trembling. In that moment, I heard footsteps. Not the child's quiet footsteps. Heavy adult footsteps coming from behind a row of pines. My heart leaped. Another camper? A ranger? Help? Finally? It was Matt, or something that looked like Matt. Blood caked his shirt, and there was a ragged hole in his side where Claire's bullet had struck. But he moved smoothly, arms swinging. His face was pale, the eyes vacant. Still, he wore that wide grin, lips pulled so taut they seemed ready to split. I scrambled for the gun. Claire had it tucked at her waist, but she was barely conscious. I fumbled, my hands shaking. Matt advanced slowly, silent. Boone barked, then whimpered, backing away. Matt stepped right over to Claire, kneeling beside her. My mind screamed to do something, but my body was paralyzed with fear and confusion. This was impossible. Matt was dead miles away. He had no pulse. I felt it. Claire moaned. Matt placed a hand on her forehead. She gave a rattling breath. Then she went still. Her eyes stared up at the twisted canopy and her lips parted. I felt for her pulse. Nothing. She was gone. "Get away from her," I shouted, tears burning my face. I shook her, but she was limp, eyes vacant. Matt, or whatever it was, simply stood. Up close, his skin looked as if it was flaking away, revealing dark bark underneath. His grin sharpened. I found the gun, aimed it at him, hand trembling, but he didn't react. He just studied me, as though waiting for me to join him. A red haze of fury overcame me. I fired once. The bullet tore through his shoulder, flinging bits of rot. He didn't cry out. I fired again. Another chunk of flesh exploded from his torso. It made no difference. He kept advancing. So I scrambled forward, the multi-tool in my other hand, and slashed wildly at his midsection. He emitted a high-pitched hiss, staggering backward. Black fluid seeped from the wounds, stinking of mud and decay. I seized that moment, grabbing Claire's body by the shoulders. But she was too heavy, and I realized with crushing sorrow that she was gone. I let out a strangled cry, unsure what to do. My chest felt too tight to breathe. Matt advanced again, letting out that hiss. Something that looked like bark cracked along his neck, revealing swirling patterns of wood beneath his flesh. The adrenaline soared. I whipped around, grabbed a thick branch from the ground, and swung it as hard as I could against his knees. The blow connected with a sickening snap, sending him toppling. He writhed, trying to rise again, so I kept striking, pounding down until the creature, my cousin's reanimated corpse, stopped moving. Splinters of bone or bark jutted out. My stomach lurched at the gore, but I was lost in primal terror. Finally, he lay still, a mangled husk. I crawled away, retching, tears streaming. Boone whined, nuzzling my arm. The forest had gone silent again. Claire lay dead a few feet away. Matt's body was in pieces. Blood or sap or something stained the pine needles. This was the darkest moment of my life, but I knew I couldn't linger. With trembling hands, I pressed a kiss to Claire's forehead. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." Then I backed away, half crawling, half running, with no idea where to go. The final encounter. The forest labyrinth swallowed me once more. I was alone except for Boone, who limped beside me. I had no sense of time or direction. I clutched the gun with damp, bloody fingers, not even sure if there were bullets left. Part of me wanted to curl up and die, but a louder part demanded I keep moving. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing by a massive, gnarled oak. Its trunk was carved with spirals, some symmetrical, others random, forming an unsettling pattern. Children's shoes hung from the branches. Dozens of them, old and decaying, swinging in an unseen breeze. My heart hammered. Boone began barking in a frenzy. Then I saw him, Eli, the pale boy, stepping out from behind the oak. He was still barefoot, still dripping with that black fluid. When he smiled, his teeth were too sharp, almost triangular. He raised a hand toward me, beckoning. "Max," he said, in a voice like wind through reeds. "You let me in. I'm part of you now. I am your second skin. Why fight it?" I felt an icy dread run through me. The child's eyes were impossibly old, swirling with reflections of the spirals carved in the bark. Boone snarled, baring his teeth. Eli flicked his gaze to the dog, and in one swift moment Boone lunged at him. The boy opened his mouth wider than humanly possible, revealing blackness within. Boone's jaws clamped on Eli's arm. A high, inhuman shriek ripped through the air, making my ears ring. I forced myself to act. I sprinted forward, yanking the flare from my belt. I'd brought it for an emergency signal, never thinking I'd use it like this. I jammed the flare between Eli's teeth and struck it. A blast of sparkling red flame erupted in his mouth. He screeched, reeling backward. Boone released him, howling in pain as black fluid splattered the dog's muzzle. Eli contorted, limbs elongating, eyes bulging. The stench of burning rot filled the clearing. I shoved the flare deeper, watching in horror as flames flickered across his pale skin. He collapsed to his knees, thrashing. The bark on the oak behind him caught some of the burning fluid, igniting into a greenish flame. The entire trunk smoldered with an otherworldly glow. For a moment, he tried to rise, crawling on all fours. I saw too many angles to his limbs, a mass of writhing flesh that defied sense. Then he collapsed again, letting out a final ear-splitting shriek. The next moment, silence. No body remained. No bones. He simply melted into a black, tar-like substance that sizzled in the flames. I dropped the flare, stumbling backward, dizzy with relief and grief and terror. The trunk of the oak was scorched, the children's shoes crackling in the heat. The stench was overwhelming, but I dragged Boone away, ignoring my own trembling legs. For a moment, the entire forest flickered with that greenish-blue light, then went dark. Escape. Boone and I staggered onward, barely conscious. I had no idea how long we walked. Time was meaningless. We passed a cluster of cypress, and suddenly I saw a dirt road, one that looked suspiciously like the route I'd driven in on. The sun was low in the sky now, as if it might be dawn or dusk. I stumbled over to the road, following it desperately, until I saw movement. A Florida Fish and Wildlife Ranger's truck. I waved my arms. The ranger, an older man with a gray mustache, got out, eyes widening. "Holy, are you hurt, son?" he asked. I broke down, babbling about the horrors in the hammock, about Matt and Claire. He called for backup, tried to calm me. When I mentioned them by name, he said, "No one else was registered for Devil's Hammock. It was just you. Are you sure about these people?" I insisted I was sure. But the more I tried to show him proof, the less I could find. The photos on my phone were only of me and Boone. No pictures of Matt or Claire. Even my text messages with them were missing. The ranger frowned. He assumed I was in shock. He told me to get in his truck. He'd take me to a medical station. I collapsed in the passenger seat with Boone lying across my lap. I wanted so badly to believe I was safe, but everything felt unsteady, like I wasn't fully in reality. They took me to a hospital in Gainesville, where I got treated for dehydration and exhaustion. They found no evidence that I had traveled with two companions. No missing person reports for Matt or Claire Jennings. The authorities told me that no one by those names was reported in the area. I left multiple voicemails for my relatives, but the calls never connected. Boone recovered, though he had tremors for weeks. They never found the campsite with my tent or anything resembling the place I described. The sheriff's department sent out a search party, but came back with nothing. Eventually, they told me it was likely I'd been camping alone, had become disoriented and hallucinated the rest. But I know what happened. I can't deny the memories or the terror that sometimes still keeps me awake. Devil's Hammock took more than my peace of mind. It took my family, my friends. Some nights I dream of spirals carved in trees and a pale child with an impossible smile, whispering my name. For a while, I tried to go back to normal life. Yet, I notice things even now. Boone doesn't meet my eye like he used to. Sometimes I catch my reflection in a window, and I seem to be blinking less often than a normal person. Every so often, there's a faint taste of sulfur in the back of my throat. At times, I catch myself smiling too wide in the mirror, for no reason at all. And that is why I can't stay anywhere too long or trust my own mind. Because I brought something out of those woods with me. Or rather, it followed me. Maybe it's inside me, and I don't know if I'll ever be truly free from Devil's Hammock. All I know is, if you see a child wandering barefoot in those Florida swamps, if you hear a little voice call your name, walk away, because once you step off that trail, there might be no coming back. Remember my words, and stay far from that cursed place. I couldn't save Matt and Claire, but maybe I can save someone else, if it's even real anymore. If I'm even real, I don't know. But if you ever feel something behind you in the trees, or if you find your sense of time unraveling, or your phone draining for no reason, just remember, you were warned, and pray you can escape. My name is Nathan Carter. I was 34 years old when this happened in May of 2024. I had come to Blackwater River State Forest in the Florida Panhandle to escape my life, or at least what it had become. I'm not a veteran, not some hardened outdoorsman. I'm just a regular guy who spent most of his adult life in front of computers trying to find his place. But by that spring, everything felt like it was falling apart. My marriage had collapsed. Friends were drifting away. My anxieties were clawing at me. I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe to everyone else, that I could step away from the world and find some kind of peace in the wild. I mentioned the idea to my childhood friend Caleb Jennings, and, much to my surprise, he jumped at the opportunity. Caleb was the closest thing I had to a brother. At 36, he was the confident one. Broad shoulders, loud voice, always acting like he knew what he was doing. I think he felt sorry for me, and maybe he thought a few days in the wilderness would do me some good. Or maybe he just wanted to talk me into another scheme or business idea. Caleb was big on that sort of thing, always hustling. We set out that first morning with my 5-year-old German Shepherd, Scout. Scout was big, curious, and protective. A dog I trusted more than most people. We each carried a backpack loaded with what we thought would be enough gear for a 3-day stay. Freeze-dried meals, water filters, a small tent, first aid kits, lighters, matches. We also had old-school paper maps of the forest, because we heard cell reception was spotty or non-existent out there. I looked forward to the silence. I had a dumb fantasy of starting fresh, out where pine trees and swampy undergrowth replaced the constant hum of technology. We parked near a dirt road on the edge of the forest. The day was sweltering, typical Florida heat, with insects buzzing and the air so humid I was sweating through my shirt in minutes. We found the trailhead, signed in at a small check-in box for hikers, and started walking. The forest was both beautiful and ominous. Towering pines, palmetto shrubs, vines drooping from cypress trees, and every so often a watery area that looked more like a swamp than a forest floor. The place was quiet, aside from bird calls and the scuttling of small animals. "Hey, Nate," Caleb said, after about an hour of walking. "Doing okay?" I gave a little nod. Yeah, sweaty, but okay. He chuckled. "We just need to find a good spot to set up camp by the river. Supposed to be a nice place with plenty of fish." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through a downloaded map. He was never one to trust old paper, and grimaced. "Cell's almost dead already?" That was the first sign something was off. Our phones had both been fully charged. No reason his battery should be at 10% after an hour on standby. I tried mine. It refused to even turn on. Dead as a brick. No big deal, I told myself. We had the forest map. We had water. We could do this the old-fashioned way. Scout, for his part, seemed restless. He kept pulling on the leash, then abruptly stopping. Sometimes he would glance behind us, hackles raised, almost like he caught a scent of something that didn't belong. Caleb teased me about my nervous dog, but I'd never seen Scout act like that before. Eventually, around midday, we found what seemed like a good clearing not far from a small, winding river. The banks were swampy, but there were dry patches of ground above the water line. We set up the tent, unrolled sleeping bags, and went looking for dry wood to start a fire. Getting the kindling lit took longer than I expected. The humidity didn't help, but when the flames finally caught, I felt a strange satisfaction. The tension in my chest unclenched a little. This was why I'd come. To do something with my hands. To get away from the city and the heartbreak I'd left behind. We ate freeze-dried stew with water we filtered from the river. The sky gradually darkened. Stars were unbelievable out there. No light pollution to blot them out. I let Scout roam a bit, and he trotted around nose to the ground. Occasionally, he'd pause and stare at something in the darkness. I told myself it was just a raccoon or a possum, maybe a deer, but every now and then his ears perked up in that intense way that said more than any bark. He was on guard. Something was nearby. I tried to ignore it and focus on the crackling flames. We had a good night's rest ahead of us, or so I hoped. Caleb started into one of his talkative moods. He leaned in, swirling his spork in the remains of his meal. "Hey, Nate," he said quietly. "I know you've had it rough. I mean, the divorce, your job." I immediately tensed. "Let's not talk about that. Just hear me out. I've got a plan. You sell your half of that property in Atlanta." "Caleb," I cut in, "I'm done chasing your money-making schemes." He held up a hand. "Would you rather keep living paycheck to paycheck? You got enough stashed away to invest in something real, something new." I sighed, massaging my temples. This was the last conversation I wanted right then, but I also couldn't blame him. He was always hustling, like I said, always convinced the next plan would make him rich. I couldn't find it in me to get angry, not after everything that had happened. So I kept my voice calm and told him we'd talk about it another time. The fire crackled. I caught a whiff of something foul, like sulfur or burnt hair, on the shifting wind. Scout's nose twitched. Caleb must have smelled it too because he made a face. Before I could say anything, the flames flickered strangely and glowed momentarily green and then blue, returning to normal within seconds. We stared at each other. "Something in the wood?" I asked, half joking. Caleb shrugged. "Weird chemical runoff or something. Hell if I know." It unsettled me enough that I checked the woodpile. It looked normal, just dead branches. I let it go. Soon enough, we turned in for the night, unzipping the tent enough to let a breeze in. Scout, typically content to curl up at my feet, kept pacing, whining softly. Only after I coaxed him with some leftover bits of jerky did he settle down, pressing tight against me as if he needed comfort. I drifted to sleep thinking about my ex-wife's face, about how haunted her eyes were the day she moved out. I felt some twisted mix of guilt and relief, the same kind I always felt. Then I dreamt of an endless pit in the woods. In that dream, I was kneeling at its edge, an impossible circle carved into the ground, the earth scorched black around it. Something whispered to me from its depths. It offered peace, a life free from regret. But it never said how. I woke up to the kind of quiet that immediately sets your teeth on edge. Scout was gone. Caleb, still tangled in his sleeping bag, was snoring faintly. I checked the tent door, unzippered from the inside. My heart slammed in my chest. Scout never left my side at night. I crawled out and looked around the campsite. The moon was a pale ghost overhead, the horizon just barely starting to lighten with the approach of dawn. I called out softly, "Scout?" No answer, just the distant drone of insects. The fire was out, just embers and smoldering ash. My phone was still dead. No matter what I did, it wouldn't power on. I grabbed a flashlight from my pack and started scanning the perimeter, whistling for him. Nothing. That awful panic set in. Anyone who's lost a pet knows that feeling. I rummaged for my boots, tugging them on so fast I nearly forgot to tie the laces. I was about to venture deeper into the woods when I heard something rustle near the edge of the clearing. A shape padded forward. Scout. I exhaled in relief, but that relief shattered the moment I realized his coat was soaking wet, dripping muddy water that stank like stagnant swamp. His eyes, typically bright and alert, seemed strangely dull. He walked right up to me, licked my hand once, and then collapsed at my feet. I knelt to examine him. Besides the muddy water, he seemed uninjured. No bite marks, no deep cuts, nothing to explain his abrupt departure. I felt the fur behind his ears. It was grimy and reeked of something almost like sulfur. "What the hell did you do?" I murmured, half to him, half to myself. I roused Caleb, who staggered out of the tent and cursed at the smell. We rinsed Scout off with some water and dried him as best we could. By now, dawn's light was creeping through the trees. We discovered the second oddity of the morning. Our food supply was ruined. The freeze-dried packets we'd left sealed were still sealed, but somehow, inside, the contents were moldy, rotten, or soaked. It was impossible. Those packets were vacuum-packed. Yet, when we tore them open, a rancid stench made me gag. Maggots writhed in one of the pouches. Caleb cursed and kicked one of the packs. "This is messed up, man. Maybe the packaging was defective, but all of them?" I shook my head, stomach tight. "I don't know." We agreed to fish or try to forage. We still had a bit of fresh water we'd filtered from the river, and we had a few snacks left in sealed plastic that didn't seem compromised. Protein bars, some nuts, that sort of thing. That was enough to keep us going for at least a day or two if we were careful. "Let's just head deeper in," Caleb suggested, though it sounded more like an order. "We'll find a better place to camp and maybe do some fishing. We'll get out of here tomorrow if it's too weird." I nodded reluctantly. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling wrapping around my gut, but a part of me still wanted to believe there was a perfectly logical explanation for all of this. Maybe something in the environment was causing a reaction with the packaging. Maybe Scout slipped off and fell in a swampy area, got disoriented. The human brain can rationalize a lot when it wants to. We packed everything up, discarding the ruined food. We made sure Scout was walking okay. He seemed a little hesitant, but otherwise physically fine. Caleb walked ahead, holding the map, leading us deeper into the forest, away from the dirt road. As we moved, the air took on a stifling quality. It felt thicker, heavier, and every now and then I caught the rotten egg's whiff of sulfur again. Flies buzzed around us, relentless. By midday, I realized we weren't following the route we had planned. According to the paper map, we should have passed a small creek that fed into the main river, but we never found it. Instead, the terrain got muddier, with more cypress knees and twisted shrubs that blocked the path. Caleb stared at the map, turning it one way then another, cursing under his breath. "This doesn't match," he muttered. "We should be near that bend in the river." I glanced around, trying to see if there was any sign of water. Nothing but endless trees and gloom. "Give me that," I said. I studied the map and tried to orient it based on a couple of reference points. The angle of the sun, a marked footpath. Nothing lined up. It was like the land had shifted overnight. An hour later, we decided to make do with whatever path we could find that led north, but the sense of direction didn't feel consistent. We'd go one way, only to end up looping back near a cluster of pines we swore we had seen before. The frustration between Caleb and me started boiling. We snipped at each other over the smallest things. At some point, we came upon a section of forest that seemed scorched. Blackened trunks jutted from the ground, the undergrowth burned away. The smell was bitter, like old ashes. There were no footprints, no sign of recent activity, but the strangest part was that it seemed contained in a perfect circle, maybe 100 feet in diameter. Beyond that circle, lush green resumed as if nothing had happened. Caleb shot me a sidelong glance. "You seeing this?" I was, and it made my heart pound. Scout whined, his ears flattened. He did not want to cross that boundary. Out of nowhere, there was a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned my head and glimpsed a figure. Someone standing at the far edge of the scorched area, leaning against a tree. He was dressed in red, though it was impossible to see his face clearly at this distance. I blinked and he was gone. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Kale, there was somebody over there." "Where?" He turned in a full circle, scanning. No sign of anyone. We backed away from that burned patch. Even the air smelled foul. I heard a faint whisper that set every nerve in my body on edge. I could have sworn it was my ex-wife's voice. "Nathan, I'm here." But that was impossible. Caleb evidently didn't hear anything. As the sun dipped low, we realized we needed to make camp again, despite having wasted half a day wandering aimlessly. We found a patch of slightly elevated ground, ringed by tall pines. The ground felt a bit more solid. We set up the tent. The temperature was dropping faster than I expected for a Florida forest. I was shivering by the time we got the fire going. Caleb tried to brush it off. "All those cypress swamps can mess with microclimates," he said. But the wind made a mournful sound, an almost human moan through the branches. For dinner, we had only the protein bars and some nuts, but not enough for a truly satisfying meal. We planned to try fishing in the morning, if we could find the main river. By the light of the fire, I looked over my dog. His eyes reflected the flames in a weird, glassy way. I wondered if he was sick, but Scout just thumped his tail a bit, trying to reassure me. When the flames started dancing different colors, green, then blue, then a sickly purple, I tried to ignore it. Maybe some mineral deposit in the wood. The sulfur smell was more or less constant now, though occasionally it faded, replaced by a damp, cold smell like old moss. The night pressed in around us like a living thing. Caleb barely spoke. I knew he was rattled. His bravado was slipping. Part of me took a grim satisfaction in seeing that he wasn't bulletproof out here, that he could be scared like anyone else. But mostly, I just felt alone. We doused the fire, crawled into the tent and tried to sleep. At one point, I swear I heard footsteps circling our camp, though I couldn't be sure. They paused near the tent. Scout gave a low growl, then silence. Eventually, I drifted off into nightmare-ridden sleep, full of swirling shadows and a tall man in red staring at me from across a pit of black fire. I woke to a scream. Caleb's voice. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, nearly knocking Scout aside. For a moment, I couldn't see Caleb in the darkness. Then, on the other side of the tent, I saw him thrashing, trying to free himself from the zippered door. Somehow, it had jammed from the inside. His eyes were wide with panic. I managed to pull the door open and we tumbled out of the tent, gasping. Caleb looked around wildly. "Someone was in here," he said, voice trembling. "What do you mean?" I asked, though my heart was already hammering. He pointed at the empty sleeping bags, both of them undone, the zippers parted from the inside. When I woke, the bag was unzipping itself. I felt hands, man. I ran a hand through my sweat-damp hair. The early dawn light was creeping in, turning the sky a pale gray. The forest was silent again, as if holding its breath. I stepped outside, scanning for footprints. I only saw our own and Scout's, but the pine needles were thick. They could have hidden anything. Then I noticed something else. The little stack of firewood we'd gathered for the morning was gone. Not scattered, gone, as though someone had come and stolen it. And our backpacks, which we had carefully arranged beside the tent flap, had moved a few feet away, lying on their sides. The top flaps were open. Inside, the few supplies we had left were rotting. The protein bars we had saved were liquefied, sludgy, and rancid. Our spare clothes smelled of mildew, though they hadn't been wet. Caleb tore through his bag, frantic, cursing. "This is impossible," he snapped. "What the hell? It's like weeks of rot happened overnight." My stomach dropped. I could find no explanation. I was beyond rational. My thoughts turned to that figure in red, the scorched circle. Some kind of sick cosmic joke. Or maybe we were in the middle of a methane vent that caused hallucinations, or a gas leak. None of it seemed plausible, but neither did any of this. We decided we had to leave. Get back to the car, drive to the nearest ranger station, anything. We were obviously not welcome here, if here was even the place we came in. I double-checked the map, trying to figure out our best route out. North, back the way we came. East, maybe? Caleb said, "We gotta find the path we came in on. We can't just keep wandering." I agreed. We took the map and compass and set out, traveling in the direction we thought was west. For hours we trudged, Scout at my side, stepping around cypress knees and muddy patches. We should have come across that old dirt road. Instead, we found ourselves near a waterlogged area that looked suspiciously like the first day's campsite, except the vegetation had changed. Now, trees were half dead. Their trunks had these weird scorch marks. The ground was littered with charred branches. Yet, the open area had the exact same slope, the same arrangement of logs in a circle, as if it were the same clearing. I felt a chill run up my spine. This place was messing with us. Caleb lost it. He threw the map on the ground and stomped on it, raging about how worthless it was. Scout growled at him, unsettled by the sudden outburst. I put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "We'll figure it out," I said, voice shaking despite my attempt at calm. "We have to stay calm, man." He jerked away, face twisted with anger, or maybe fear. "Yeah, maybe you think calm will fix everything, but it won't. We're lost, we have no food, no phone, and you won't even consider listening to me about a real plan. I'm trying to help you, Nate?" A harsh silence followed. The tension between us was cracking open. Scout let out a low whimper. I heard the wind rattle through the branches. We decided, wordlessly, to press on. The adrenaline coursing through me was the only thing that kept me going. That, and the love for my dog, who stayed close, ears pricked up at every sound. Sometime in the afternoon, the sense of direction completely vanished. We walked in a straight line for nearly an hour by the compass, only to find ourselves circling back. The forest seemed to twist the paths behind us. We noticed the sunlight had a strange, muted quality. Then the trees opened up to a clearing of scorched ground that sloped downward into a wide pit. It wasn't just a sinkhole or some random depression. This was a perfect circle in the earth, ringed by blackened soil. Smoke or steam rose from the pit in thin, pale tendrils. I felt like I'd stumbled into the heart of some forbidden place. My dream rushed back to me, crystal clear, kneeling at the edge, hearing voices. Scout tensed, letting out a low growl. Caleb muttered, "What the hell is that?" We approached cautiously. The pit was maybe 10 feet across, but when I tried to shine a flashlight down, I couldn't see the bottom. Just darkness, going down and down like a vertical cave. The edges were charred. The smell of sulfur made my eyes water. As we stood there, transfixed, a figure stepped out from behind a half-dead pine. He wore a long red coat, or perhaps it was a shirt, but I could see he was barefoot. His skin, where I could see it, seemed oddly darkened at the fingertips, like soot. He had a wide-brimmed hat in one hand. His face was not shadowed, but I still couldn't quite make it out, like it was slightly blurred. A flicker in this air. "Afternoon," the man said in a deep, melodic voice. "You boys look lost." I swallowed, mouth dry. "Yeah, you could say that." He smiled. I saw perfect white teeth. "I do believe I can help. I know these woods better than most." Caleb took a step forward, anger overriding caution. "Who the hell are you?" "Oh," the man paused, regarding him with a gentle tilt of the head. "I go by many names, but for your peace of mind, call me Red." He gave a small chuckle. "Or if you like, call me Old Scratch. Folks do sometimes." My heart hammered. Old Scratch was an old Southern name for the devil. My brain told me we were dealing with some crazy person, a local who might be messing with us. But there was something about that voice. The way the trees seemed to bow as he spoke, I couldn't ignore it. The man in red walked slowly toward the pit's edge, peering down with fond familiarity. "A shame you found yourself in this predicament. Hunger, fear, such sorrow you carry. If it's peace you want, I can point the way." He turned back to us, that too wide grin on his face. "All it costs is a little piece of yourself." I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat closed up. A wave of dizziness hit me. For the briefest second, I thought I saw bodies at the bottom of that pit. Twisted silhouettes of men, women, maybe even children, arms outstretched, mouths open in silent screams. Caleb cleared his throat. "We don't need your help," he said, though there was uncertainty in his voice. "We'll find our own way out." The man in red shrugged. "As you like. Just remember, time has a way of slipping in these parts. You might wander a day and find years have gone by. Sometimes folks come to me to speed it along, or slow it if that's what they fancy." Scout growled, hackles raised. The man acknowledged him with a small nod. "Ah, loyal creature. Noble spirit. Be sure to watch him. The forest does love to take." Then, with an unnerving quickness, he stepped back, disappearing behind a tree. Caleb and I shared a glance. Without a word, we rushed to see if he'd gone around the trunk. Nothing. Like he was never there. I felt my hands shaking. My mind was screaming that none of this was real or that I was dreaming. But the earth beneath my feet, the stench in my nostrils, they were undeniable. The pit still gaped behind us like a living maw. We fled that place, practically running until the undergrowth forced us to slow. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I kept glancing at Caleb, half expecting him to say we should go back, but he just kept moving, teeth gritted, eyes locked forward. That evening, our progress seemed futile. The forest darkened too quickly. We had no choice but to find somewhere to bed down. Exhaustion weighed on us. The temperature dropped again, and without a proper fire, we'd freeze. So, we made a small pit, clearing debris, praying we could get some flames going. But building the fire was a struggle. The wood spat sparks and hissed. Smoke rose but no flames. Finally, a tiny flicker caught, and we fed it with every scrap of dry tinder we had. The glow was weak and pallid, as if the forest itself was stealing away its warmth. I sat beside Scout, gently stroking his neck to calm myself as much as him. Caleb was rummaging for something in his pack, cursing softly. "What's up?" I asked. He pulled out our last water container, the filters clogged with I don't even know what. He shook it, and a dark sludge came out. "We'll have to boil water for sure." We set a small pot on the meager flames, but half the water we tried to boil evaporated or turned brackish in minutes. The taste was foul, bitter, and sulfuric. We forced a few swallows each, enough to stave off total dehydration. That night, I tried to get warm near the flickering fire. My stomach roiled, partly from hunger, partly from fear. At some point, Caleb said he needed more wood. He stood up, said, "Back in a minute," and vanished into the darkness, carrying a flashlight. I waited, dread twisting in my gut. Seconds ticked by, then minutes. My watch was still stuck on 9:14 p.m., even though it had to be later. Scout dozed fitfully at my feet, though each time a twig snapped in the distance he'd lift his head, ears perked. 10 minutes became half an hour, or maybe it was longer. It was impossible to judge time accurately. The fire was dying. I called out, "Caleb?" The only answer was the rustle of undergrowth. I glanced at Scout, grabbed my dying flashlight, and stood, heart pounding. Could he have fallen? Could something have attacked him? I called again. Finally, I heard footsteps. Caleb emerged from behind a stand of pines, arms empty, no wood. He held the flashlight in one hand, but the light was off. His face was cast in shadows. Something felt instantly wrong. "You okay?" I asked. He stepped closer, letting the weak firelight illuminate him. He wore a smile that stretched too wide. He stared at me for a moment, blinking slowly, as if dazed. I took a step back. "Where's the wood?" He just tilted his head. "Wood?" My blood turned to ice. Scout got up, fur bristling, a growl rumbling deep in his throat. I forced a laugh, trying not to betray how terrified I was. "Come on, man. You said you were getting wood for the fire. We need it, or we'll freeze out here." Caleb lifted his free hand and examined his fingernails like he was bored. "Oh, that. Sorry, just forgot." Something in his voice was all wrong. The timbre, the accent. It was flatter, more measured. I took another step back, and Scout positioned himself between me and Caleb, teeth bared. The tension in the air was like a live wire. For a moment, I thought about trying to speak to him gently, to coax him back to normal. But the grin on his face, it was like some puppet master was pulling his lips upward, not a real smile at all. "Caleb," I said softly, "you need to snap out of it." He studied me for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You ever wonder," he said, voice oddly calm, "why you're so worthless? Why your wife left you, why you can't even keep your dog safe?" My stomach twisted. The words themselves weren't the worst part. It was that he spoke them in a slow, deliberate way, as if tasting each syllable. This was not how Caleb talked. Scout barked, lunging a step forward. Caleb's expression changed in an instant, flipping from the too-wide grin to a sneer. Then, in a movement too fast to believe, he swung the flashlight like a club at the Scout's head. There was a sickening crack, and Scout yelped. "No!" I shouted, diving for them. But Scout collapsed, whimpering once. Blood trickled from the side of his skull. I stared, numb, trying to process what had just happened. Caleb crouched over Scout's body, grin reappearing. He raised the flashlight again, and I grabbed his wrist, screaming curses. He was stronger than I remembered. Or maybe I was weaker from exhaustion. We grappled, rolling over the pine needles. He landed a punch to my gut that knocked the wind out of me. Then he pinned me down, straddling my chest, panting with that terrifying grin. "Who are you?" I managed to gasp. He leaned in, eyes glittering in the faint glow of the dying fire. "I'm peace," he murmured. "I'm the release you're too scared to take." I felt his hand close around my throat. Spots danced before my eyes. I fumbled around for anything. My hand found a chunk of broken branch. With a desperate burst of strength, I slammed it into his side. He howled, rolling off me. We both scrambled to our feet. I saw his blood on the branch, black in the dim firelight. He advanced again, but I swung the branch in a blind arc. It caught him across the face, knocking him back, staggering. Caleb spat blood and laughed, a wet, ragged sound. He tried to speak, but only managed a hiss and a gurgle. Then he charged me like a feral animal. We fell together, and I felt the branch press into him, snapping ribs or something. He choked, face twisting in either pain or fury. I pushed harder, adrenaline and terror giving me strength I never knew I had. The makeshift spear tore into his torso until it was embedded deep. He convulsed, spitting blood onto my face. Then he went limp, eyes staring somewhere beyond me. For a brief second, I thought I saw a flicker of the real Caleb in those eyes, a spark of recognition or shock. Then that spark faded. He slumped, sliding off the branch, collapsing onto the pine needles. I lay there, breath ragged, tears burning my eyes. Pain radiated through my ribs, and my throat felt bruised. Scout's body was only a few feet away, motionless, blood pooling under his head. My ears rang. It was as though the forest itself was silent, watching. I struggled to my knees, crawling to Scout. I cradled him, feeling his fur still warm but limp, no heartbeat. A rush of grief tore through me, but my tears wouldn't come. I could only sit there, trembling. Everything I had, my friend, my dog, was being consumed by this cursed place. Then a voice, gentle as a grandfather's lullaby, spoke behind me. My, what a tragic scene. The man in red stood there. He seemed almost luminous in the darkness, the brim of his hat casting no shadow. He glanced at Caleb's corpse, head tilted in mock sympathy. Perhaps it was better this way. He was already half gone. I rose unsteadily, fists clenched. "Stay away from me." He took a step closer, ignoring my warning. "I can fix this, if that's what you want. You can have your dog back, strong as ever." He nodded towards Scout's body. "And your friend, if you like, though that might be more complicated." "Leave me alone," I repeated, though my voice cracked. The faint promise of Scout alive was unbearable. He sighed softly. "Such a stubborn one. You carry so much guilt, so much fear. If you only let go, I can give you peace." I stared at him, tears burning. "What do you want in return?" I asked, hating myself for even asking. He smiled. "A small piece, an eye, a heart, a soul. Whatever you feel is worth the bargain." It took every ounce of willpower, but I shook my head. "I won't do it." His expression sharpened. In an instant he was in front of me, his hand pressing to the side of my face. Heat flared, searing agony tearing through my left eye. I screamed, falling to the ground, vision exploding into blinding white. My hands flew up to my face, but it felt as if that half of the world had caught fire. He released me, stepping back with a look of mild disappointment. "Suit yourself," he said. "Your peace is taken either way." Through the pain, I saw him glance at the pitiful remains of the fire, the ragged tent, the body of Scout, and the twisted shape of Caleb. Then he faded, like a shadow receding. Darkness closed in around the edges of my vision. I collapsed, howling in pain, my hands pressed to my burned face. I must have lost consciousness. When I came to, I was lying on damp ground, half of my face caked in dried blood. My left eye was swollen shut, and every throb of my heartbeat sent a wave of pain through my skull. Caleb's body was still there, just as I'd left it, though the color of his skin looked changed, a grayish pallor. The scout was beside me, stiff, eyes half open, unseeing. Grief and pain warred in my chest. I couldn't stay there or I'd die, so I forced myself upright. My sense of time was wrecked. My watch still read 9:14, no help there. The forest around me felt weirdly silent. I staggered, leaving the campsite barely able to see. My left eye was useless, and my right eye was blurry with tears and exhaustion. I stumbled through the trees, not even sure which direction I was going. Hours might have passed as I lurched between tall pines, my hands scraped raw by brambles, mud caking my legs up to my knees. I tripped into watery patches, nearly drowning in a swampy sinkhole at one point, dragging myself out by a low branch. My head throbbed, and something told me I might be severely injured. But fear drove me onward. Fear of staying in that cursed place. At some point, the forest canopy opened slightly, and I found the dirt road, or at least a dirt road. It might have been the same one we came in on. The surface was rough, partially overgrown. I followed it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, ignoring how the light around me had shifted to an eerie twilight. The temperature was much colder than it had any right to be in Florida in May. Eventually, I stumbled upon an old car on the side of the road, half buried in leaves and pine needles. The metal was rusted, the windows gone. I recognized it with a jolt of confusion. It was the same model and color as my own car. Heart hammering, I approached it. The license plate was the exact same plate I had, but the year sticker said 2017. That made no sense. I had just renewed the tags before the trip. I looked inside and saw a backpack covered in mildew, a swirl of tattered clothing. On the driver's seat lay a photograph in a warped frame. My ex-wife and me smiling at each other in a time long gone. My ex-wife had died. No, my mind reeled. She hadn't died. She left me. She left me to go back to her hometown. Why would there be a picture in this car? I stepped back, fear rattling my bones. I glanced around, shivering. A few white flakes drifted down from the sky. Snow. In Florida. I stumbled forward again, ignoring the madness. My eye felt like it was on fire. Maybe I was dying. Maybe this was some hallucination in the final moments of my life. I told myself to just keep moving. The road twisted, and at some point, it merged onto a paved one, still hidden in the thick pines. The wind brought the sound of distant traffic, or maybe I imagined it. My feet were numb, and my breath scraped my raw throat. I forced one foot in front of the other, tears streaming down my face. By the time I reached a more open area, the sky had brightened. Dawn? Evening? I couldn't tell. I just saw that it was cold, that a light dusting of snow clung to the pine needles. I scanned the horizon for signs of civilization, expecting to see the short gravel lot where we'd parked. Instead, I found a battered, abandoned sign that read Blackwater River State Forest Ranger Station 2 miles. I limped forward, praying that the station was still there, that I hadn't slipped further into a nightmare timeline. I wanted rescue, or at least closure. But a voice lingered in the back of my mind, a memory of that man in red telling me time had a way of slipping. Maybe it was too late, maybe years had passed, maybe no one was left to help. When I finally collapsed on the side of the road, something barked in the distance, an echo, or perhaps my own delirium. For a moment, I wanted to turn around to see if Scout was there, wagging his tail, but I knew he wasn't. The devil had offered to bring him back, and I'd refused. Or maybe I hadn't refused fast enough. My face throbbed, and I remembered the searing burn of that inhuman hand. I never turned around. I lay there on the cold pavement, the taste of salt and ash in my mouth, letting the white flakes settle on my bloody clothes. My mind drifted. The last coherent thought I had was that I'd done this to myself. I'd come seeking peace, but all I found was the devil's pit. I wish I could say I woke up to the sound of a rescue helicopter or a ranger's voice calling my name. But I only recall stumbling onward, half blind, until my body gave out. Whether someone found me, or I eventually reached a road that led to help, is a haze. Even now, I'm not entirely sure how much time truly passed. The doctors said the damage to my left eye looked like a severe chemical burn, though no known substance matched. They asked me if I'd been near any industrial sites or meth labs. I told them the bare minimum, that I had an accident in the woods. I couldn't talk about the rest. They would have locked me up in a psych ward. Caleb's fate remained a mystery. Search teams never found his body, according to the authorities. They chalked it up to one more hiker lost in the wilderness, remains scattered by wildlife or sunk in a swamp. I never told them exactly where to look. I was terrified of that pit, and of who or what might be standing near it, waiting. I still dream about Scout. In those dreams, he's running ahead of me, tail wagging, as if urging me to follow him back into the forest. But I can't cross that circle of scorched earth around the pit. Sometimes in these dreams I see a figure in red standing at the edge, beckoning. A whisper floats up. I can bring him back. I always wake drenched in sweat, half expecting to smell sulfur. Sometimes I do. As for the sense of time, I'll never be certain how long I was truly lost. My body felt like I'd aged years in a matter of days. I look in the mirror sometimes and see more gray in my hair, deeper lines around my eyes. My left eye is gone, replaced by a milky scar. And in rare moments, if the light catches the scar at the wrong angle, it feels warm, as if something still burns beneath the surface. I try to live a normal life now. I avoid deep forests, avoid traveling anywhere that might have large swaths of unpeopled land. I moved to a small apartment near the coast, a place with streetlights and sirens, human sounds to keep the hush of the wilderness at bay. Sometimes I still see a man in the corner of my vision, dressed in red, smiling at me just before I blink and he's gone. Whenever the memory of the pit creeps into my head, I remind myself, I survived, barely. But I paid a price. For all my regrets, for all the times I've longed to see my dog again, or to save Caleb, I remember that silent clearing, the charred ground, and the presence that took everything from me. Because the devil doesn't wait for you to come prepared. He waits for you to be desperate, to be lost, to be at your weakest. Then he offers what you think you need. And if you're foolish enough to say yes, he takes much more than you ever agreed to give. I said no, and he still took my eye. If there's a lesson in that, maybe it's this: some debts you owe just for stepping foot in his territory. And sometimes, all you can do is limp away, half blind, and hope you make it back to a world that still exists. Even now, when the wind howls late at night, I swear I hear Scout barking from somewhere far away, beckoning me to return to that cursed spot. I never will. I can't. There's nothing left there but the pit. And the man in red, still grinning, still waiting for the next desperate soul to wander by. My name is James Kessler. I was 33 years old when this happened to me in November 2023. Some people say you should never wander off into the wilderness alone if you aren't prepared. I agree with that now, but I wanted to reclaim a sense of myself that I felt I had lost after a messy breakup and a near breakdown at work. I was not a military veteran. In fact, I had almost no wilderness experience beyond day hikes and a handful of childhood scouting trips. But I felt driven to prove my independence and in some twisted way my worth. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. I saved up some money, quit my sales job in Dallas, gathered a couple of weeks' worth of supplies, and headed to the Florida mountains in New Mexico. I brought my beloved German Shepherd, Duke, hoping for companionship and an extra layer of security. I had read that the Florida mountains were far less crowded than most other ranges, and that Mahoney Park Campground, nestled near the base, was a peaceful site with broad meadows and juniper trees that could give me the isolation I craved. My plan was simple: spend 2 weeks off-grid, meditate, hike, and get some clarity on my life before returning to civilization with a new perspective. I had no idea my search for peace would be derailed so horribly. The first day was mostly about arrival. The drive out from Dallas took me through endless desert landscapes. By the time I was approaching the Florida mountains, the sun was dipping low behind the rocky slopes, painting everything in a dusty orange. Duke was restless in the back seat, occasionally pawing at the window. When I finally reached Mahoney Park, it was almost dark, but I found a suitable flat patch of ground to set up my small 2-person tent. For a remote site, Mahoney Park had a rudimentary pit toilet and a fire ring or two, but not much else. I introduced Duke to the environment. He sniffed around, ears perked and alert. After I unpacked my gear, I made a small fire to cook some quick camp dinner. My plan was to keep a journal every night, documenting how I felt, what I observed, and how the solitude affected me. That first night I scrawled in it. Day 1, I'm nervous, but oddly excited. The air is crisp. Duke's in good spirits. I'm here to find peace. I can do this. I slept deeply, lulled by the flicker of the dying fire and the reassuring presence of Duke curled near my legs. On the second day, I woke with the sun blazing directly into my tent. No unusual chills, no nightmares, just the typical stiff feeling that comes from sleeping on hard ground. I heated some water for instant coffee on my small camping stove and gave Duke his breakfast. Then I hiked up a nearby slope to get a view of the campground. The Florida mountains rolled out around me, rugged, shadowy peaks that felt both comforting and alien. It was around midday when I noticed someone standing near my camp. My heart jumped because I hadn't expected any fellow campers this deep in the off-season. I scrambled down, trying not to look too alarmed, and saw the man wave politely. He had a sturdy build, a rugged outdoorsman kind of look, brown hair streaked with some early gray, neatly trimmed stubble, and a kind of self-assured posture I don't often see. I'd find out soon enough his name was Lucas. "Hey," I greeted him, still catching my breath. Duke bounded up to him, tail wagging, curious as always when encountering a stranger, but then abruptly skidded to a halt a few feet away. His ears went back, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. I'd had Duke for years, and I'd never seen him act like that on first meeting someone. He wasn't usually timid or hostile. This was out of character. Lucas just smiled, a slow, neutral grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Guess he doesn't like me much," he said. "No worries, friend. He might get used to me eventually." He kept his hands open at his sides as if not wanting to appear threatening. Something about his manner was off. Maybe it was the fact that Duke, of all dogs, was reluctant to approach him. I apologized for the dog's behavior, and Lucas brushed it off easily. "I've been hiking around here," he explained. "I didn't expect to see anyone else. Mind if I rest by your fire a bit?" I hesitated. Normally, I'd have no problem sharing a campsite for a break, but a knot of discomfort twisted in my gut. Still, I reminded myself I was out here for clarity, not to feed paranoia, so I offered him the stump I'd been using as a seat. We ended up talking as I rekindled the embers. He said he was on an extended hike across parts of southwestern New Mexico, looking for something. When I asked him what, he shrugged and changed the subject, asking if I was running from something or running to something. That question felt too personal. I just said that life had been stressful and I needed to get away. Lucas nodded as though he understood completely. But there was something in the tilt of his head, in the calmness of his gaze, that unsettled me. He spoke in a smooth, almost old-fashioned way. No slang, few contractions. He also never seemed to blink. After an hour or so of stilted conversation, Lucas stood up and offered to share some of his food. He reached into his pack and pulled out what looked like dried jerky. I politely declined. My stomach was already queasy. Duke was still standing aside, hackles raised. Eventually, Lucas said, "I'll be around if you want company. Just make sure you don't get lost." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned, patted his pack, and walked off between two large boulders. Duke let out a low, lingering growl as soon as the man vanished from sight. That night, I couldn't help feeling on edge. I started writing in my journal, and some of my words bled from pen to page in a frantic scrawl. This Lucas guy is weird. Doesn't blink much. Duke hates him. Tried to be nice, but he's so intense. Talked about me running from something. I didn't tell him about the meltdown or how I left my job. I wonder if he can somehow read me. I'll stay aware. Around midnight, I drifted into a dream. I was back at my old apartment, the one I'd shared with my ex-girlfriend, Mary Ann. But the windows were shattered, the furniture burned and smoking. I saw Mary Ann standing in the corner, her hair on fire, her face contorted in silent agony. I tried to yell her name, but no sound came out. When I reached out to her, her face morphed into a skull, and the heat seared my hand. I jerked awake with a gasp, covered in sweat, my breath tearing out of my lungs in sharp bursts. Duke was sitting up, ears alert, but everything else was still. My watch said 3:12 a.m. The next thing I noticed was the glow outside my tent. Faint, but unnatural, almost bluish. I unzipped the tent flap, looked around. The fire pit was still smoldering red embers, not blue. I flicked on my flashlight but saw nothing out of the ordinary except my journal, lying open near the pit. I was certain I had zipped it in my tent. Yet here it was, splayed open to the page I had written on earlier. Another detail. The corner of that page looked burned. A tiny black patch of char that smelled like sulfur. I put the journal away, thoroughly spooked, and forced myself to get some more sleep. Duke circled once before curling at my feet, but I could sense he was uneasy as well. The third day started with a jolt of frustration. My phone, which had been fully charged the previous afternoon, was now completely dead. It wouldn't power on. The battery icon didn't even flash. I tried not to panic. After all, I told myself I wanted an off-grid experience. Still, the phone had been my fallback in case of an emergency. Then, my handheld GPS began acting bizarre. I flipped it on, and the small screen showed my coordinates bouncing around. First, it placed me about a mile east, then half a mile west. Then it displayed some random altitude that made no sense. It was as if my exact location was disappearing and reappearing in microseconds. I gave up on it, figuring maybe the batteries were low, though I'd only used it for an hour or so of orientation. That left me with a paper map of the area, one I had purchased online before coming out. But when I spread it out on the hood of my truck, I saw it was almost cartoonish in how it depicted local trails. Places were labeled differently than I remembered. The Red Hollow, Black Ash Glen. I was sure those names hadn't been there when I checked it the day before. Swallowing my unease, I decided I'd do a short day hike to clear my head. I'd rely on my sense of direction and the rough knowledge I had from memory. Duke followed. He seemed calmer away from camp, sniffing at brush, chasing lizards. The walk itself was beautiful for a while. The Florida mountains have these rugged slopes broken by high desert plateaus, scattered cacti, and lichen-covered rocks. We made good time, and I felt some of the tension melt away, until I glimpsed a figure far below, walking near where my campsite should have been. I pulled out my binoculars. I saw Lucas standing motionless, looking up the slope. Even from a distance, I could almost feel his eyes lock onto mine. A chill ran through me and I turned away. When I looked again, he was gone. By the time we returned to camp in the late afternoon, I was exhausted. I tried to start a fire to cook dinner, but every time I got the flames high, they would sputter and fade in a matter of minutes. The wood was dry, so I couldn't figure out why it wasn't catching. Finally, after half an hour of coaxing, the flames stayed. I passed the time by scribbling in my journal, describing the day's oddities. Duke lay close by, glancing into the darkness every so often as though expecting someone or something to emerge. Somewhere around 9, I was nodding off in my camp chair when a rustling in the brush startled me upright. The hair on Duke's neck bristled. I gripped my flashlight and aimed it at the edges of the campsite. That was when I saw him, Lucas, standing just outside the circle of firelight, watching. I yelped in surprise, and he stepped forward. "Sorry to scare you," he said softly. "I noticed your fire was having trouble earlier. Thought I'd see if you needed help." He wore the same clothes as before, khaki cargo pants, a dusty long-sleeve shirt, a worn-out baseball cap, and carried a large pack. Duke's growl was more menacing this time, deeper. I motioned for him to stay calm. Lucas, for his part, didn't back away or show fear. He just moved around the perimeter of my campsite slowly, as though evaluating everything. "How? Did you get out here?" I asked, trying to keep the tension out of my voice. He shrugged. "Been exploring the area. Figured I'd pass back by." Then he squatted near the fire, took a piece of wood from his bag, and tossed it in. The flames surged high and bright, turning a strange shade of blue at the tip. I gasped, and Lucas smiled to himself. "Interesting, right?" he remarked, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't know what to say. The truth was, seeing the blue fire triggered a wave of dread that I couldn't explain. My instincts were screaming that something about Lucas was fundamentally wrong. That night, I dreamt again of Marianne. This time, I was the one on fire, my hands pressed to my face, my skin peeling in sheets. She pointed at me, her jaw distended, no voice. I woke up shaking, and it took me several minutes to realize I was still at my campsite, that it was near dawn. Gray light filtered through the mesh of my tent. Duke was out cold, or so I thought, until he let out a short, sharp bark at nothing in particular. I unzipped my sleeping bag and stumbled out onto the rocky ground. The morning air bit into my skin. My first shock, I noticed my sleeping bag wasn't in the tent. It was lying outside, unzipped completely, spread flat on the stones like a piece of hide. The entire zipper was intact, and there was no sign of a struggle, but it was definitely moved, and I had no memory of doing that. Second shock, almost all my food supplies were ruined. The dry goods I had carefully sealed in plastic containers looked as if they'd been left in a compost heap for a month. Moldy, wet, and infested with wriggling maggots. My canisters of water smelled foul, tinged with sulfur. My extra clothes were scattered around like someone had rifled through them. Immediately, I thought of Lucas, but I couldn't reconcile how he could have done it without me or Duke hearing him. Or maybe my sense of time was so off that I had slept through it all. I felt panic knotting in my belly. I had enough water left in my truck to get me by for a day or two, and maybe some sealed energy bars that were hopefully still okay. But if this was sabotage, I needed to decide whether to stick it out or leave. A stubborn part of me refused to flee at the first sign of adversity. Maybe it was my pride. I tried to rationalize. It could be wildlife. Raccoons can do a lot of damage. Though I couldn't recall ever seeing raccoons chew right through sealed containers so neatly. I spent that morning collecting my scattered belongings and trying to salvage what I could. Around noon, I realized I hadn't seen Duke in at least an hour. Usually, he followed me everywhere. I whistled, called his name, nothing. A wave of sickness hit me. Had he chased something into the desert? I spent the rest of the day hiking around the nearby washes and small canyons, calling for him. No response, not even a distant bark. As night crept in, I was forced to return to camp empty-handed. My panic had transformed into a hollow fear. When I finally settled by the fire I managed to rekindle, thankfully it lit properly this time, I stared into the flames, trying to figure out my next step. My truck was only a mile away, but for some reason, the idea of driving off in the dark felt like opening a door into a deeper nightmare. Maybe I was afraid I would see Lucas again, waiting at the road. Maybe I was afraid I'd never find Duke. So I stayed. Close to midnight, I heard the sound of paws approaching. Relief flooded me. I thought it had to be Duke. I was about to jump up and call his name when he entered the ring of firelight. My joy froze in my throat. Duke looked off. Physically, he seemed unharmed, no visible wounds, but he moved slowly, deliberately, as if his limbs were stiff. His eyes were duller, lacking the usual brightness I recognized. When I reached out, he sniffed my hand almost mechanically, then sat down with this blank stare I'd never seen before in him. He wasn't wagging his tail, he just gazed at me with a half-open mouth. "Duke, buddy, come here," I said softly, patting my thigh. He didn't move. I went to him, rubbed his ears, checked him for injuries. He was warm, breathing fine, but the spark of recognition wasn't in his eyes. It felt like he was wearing a dog's body, but wasn't truly my dog. I glanced around the campsite, half expecting Lucas to appear again, but nothing else stirred. Once the initial relief at Duke's return passed, a deeper worry took root. Something had happened out there in the desert. Something that left my dog's spirit behind. Trying to ignore my growing dread, I steered Duke into the tent and zipped us both inside. I laid down, placing my arm over him. He stayed mostly rigid, occasionally letting out a low whine. Eventually, I drifted into a tense doze, dreaming of shadows flickering around the tent, voices whispering that I'd never leave. The next morning, I woke up sore and exhausted, mouth dry as sandpaper. Duke was lying with his head on my leg, not quite asleep, but not alert either. Outside, the sun was high, meaning I'd slept later than usual. I crawled out of the tent to check my gear. That was when I saw my journal lying in the dirt, open to pages I hadn't written. I recognized my handwriting style, but not the content. "He's in you now. Burn the dog. Time is a flat loop. You are a kink." Sick waves of confusion and horror washed through me. I was certain I had never written those words. Yet the script was a precise match for my own. I slammed the journal shut, tossed it aside, and tried to gather my wits. My supplies were even more depleted than before. Some of my extra water from the truck was gone, and I suspected Lucas had come in the night. I felt like a trapped animal, half considering whether to pack up and leave right that minute. Duke wandered out from the tent. He stared blankly for a few moments, then approached the fire ring, sniffing around the cold ashes. I tried to coax him to me with a piece of jerky, one of the few items still intact. He chewed it slowly, almost mechanically. I decided it was time to go. I needed real help, I started shoving things into my backpack, but in my haste, I realized certain items had disappeared entirely. My compass, my flashlight, spare batteries. Aggravated, I lunged for my truck keys in my pocket, only to confirm they were thankfully still there. I slung the pack over one shoulder and whistled for Duke to follow. My plan was to get to the truck, drive back to the nearest town. Deming was an hour away, and regroup. If Lucas wanted to follow me, so be it. I'd contact the authorities if I had to. As I began the short walk to the vehicle, every step felt like crossing a mile. The desert sun was merciless, beads of sweat trickling down my back. Duke trotted behind me, the crunch of gravel under his paws. I saw the white gleam of my truck in the distance, partially hidden behind some junipers. When I reached it, my heart sank. All 4 tires were deflated, slashed. That was obvious from a distance. The side panels had deep gouges in them, like someone had taken a blade and raked it across the metal. My body went cold. I ran up, yanked the door handle, and found the interior rummaged through as well. More valuables, like my extra phone charger, were missing or destroyed. The spare tire was also shredded and left in the truck bed as if to mock any chance of repair. I screamed into the empty air, a guttural cry of frustration. It felt like I was fighting a ghost. Duke just sat in the shade, staring into space. Checking my phone again proved pointless. Still dead. My last lifeline was my own 2 feet. I calculated that if I followed the dirt roads, I could hike out in a day, maybe 2, though I didn't relish the idea of leaving my heavier camping gear behind. But at that point, it was survival first. I turned around, scanning the horizons, half expecting to see Lucas standing on a rock somewhere, smirking at me. The mountains and desert, however, remained silent and indifferent. Fear swelled in my gut. I was in a remote area with limited supplies, limited water, a dog that seemed half-possessed, and an unknown assailant who might be toying with me. I decided I had no choice but to head out on foot. Realistically, I should have done it right then. But I made a mistake. I thought I could wait until dusk to avoid the punishing heat, then push through the cooler hours of the night. That plan gave me time to try to salvage more supplies and reorganize. Unfortunately, it also gave Lucas, or whoever, or whatever, was out there more time to sabotage me further. By mid-afternoon, I was back at my tent, systematically checking each container for anything edible or drinkable. When I opened the largest plastic tub, I gagged at the smell. Rotting food, teeming with maggots. My lips curled in disgust, and I tried to fling the tub away from me only to have some of the foul liquid splatter across my pant leg. I nearly vomited. Anger flared in me, and I realized I was done playing nice. If I saw Lucas again, I would confront him, maybe threaten him with a weapon if it came to that. I found a tent stake with a sharp metal tip, about 10 inches long, and clutched it in my hand. It wasn't much, but it gave me a scrap of courage. That evening, as the sky began to turn pink, I built another fire. Oddly, it caught with no trouble, as if mocking my earlier frustration. I had enough water for myself and Duke to make it through one more day, maybe. We'd have to start hiking at sundown. The plan was to take a direct route along a dirt track that eventually led to a highway. I sat next to the fire, nursing a small tin cup of what remained of my coffee, my legs trembling with tension. When the sun dipped below the mountains, I heard a rustle behind me. I spun around. Duke let out a strange low whine. I saw Lucas standing about 20 yards away, visible in the dying light. He didn't bother to hide. He walked right into my campsite as if it belonged to him. This time, I stood, brandishing the tent stake. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice cracking a bit. "Why are you doing this?" Lucas gave a lazy smile. "I told you, I'm just passing by. You're the one who's chosen to stay." Then he leaned down to pet Duke, but the dog backed away. Even in his altered state, Duke recognized something monstrous in that man. "Stay back," I warned, my heart hammering in my chest. "I will stab you if I have to." Lucas regarded the tent stake in my hand almost disdainfully. "You can try," he said, as if amused, "but there are other ways." He paused, then lowered his voice. "You're not ready to leave, James. Not until the debt's paid." "What debt? I don't owe you anything," I snapped. He pointed at Duke. "You took something from me, so I took something from him. A soul for a soul. Do you wonder why your dog looks so hollow?" My breath caught in my throat. Something in his voice, so calm, so certain, made me feel like the ground was tilting. My rational mind rebelled. "That's insane," I managed. "Stay away from us." Lucas nodded slowly, eyes reflecting the fire. He made no move to attack, only stared. Then he lifted his hand in a slight wave and stepped backward into the darkness, disappearing almost as quickly as he had come. I didn't realize I was shaking until he was gone. That was it. I couldn't stand another moment in that place. I packed what little I could carry, mostly water, a few energy bars, my journal, and leashed Duke to my belt loop so he wouldn't wander off. Then I kicked dirt onto the fire and set out. The moon was bright enough that I didn't need a headlamp, though I had a small one still in my pack. The desert night was eerily silent, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced Lucas was following. The dirt track meandered around the base of the mountains for about half a mile before turning east. I estimated we had about 8 to 10 miles to go to reach a paved road. My plan was to push through, maybe rest once we were near the highway. Hours seemed to pass. Duke trudged along at my side, panting occasionally, but never whimpering or tugging at the leash. I was hyper-alert, adrenaline surging, scanning the gloom for any sign of movement. Strangely, I never seemed to make much progress. The stars overhead barely shifted in position. The moon, though bright, felt stuck in one spot. My watch told me it was 2:30 a.m., after what I believed had been 4 hours of walking. But the horizon looked almost identical to when I started. My footsteps led me across the same types of rocks, the same clusters of cacti over and over. Time felt wrong, like I was treading the same piece of ground repeatedly. Eventually, a stirring of panic rose to full-blown terror. I recognized a twisted juniper tree with a half-dead trunk that I was certain we'd passed at least 2 miles back. Yet, here it was again, as though time had looped us around. Desperately, I tried to keep track of specific landmarks. Each time, I'd find them reappearing. In my frustration, I even took a marker from my pack and drew an X on a large white rock. We walked another hour, only for me to find the same rock with my X, mocking me. By then, Duke seemed to be limping. His head drooped. He refused water when I offered it. His eyes glowed almost yellow in the moonlight, but not with life, more like a dull candle flame. I felt a pang of heartbreak to see him in such a state. At around what my watch said was 4 a.m., I stumbled, nearly losing my footing on a sharp slope. The moon was low now, or so it appeared, yet the sky wasn't growing any brighter. Exhaustion ate at my will to continue. I finally collapsed against a boulder, pulling Duke to sit by me. My entire body trembled with fatigue, and a relentless sense of dread whispered that I was never escaping this place. I must have dozed off. I jolted awake at the sound of my own scream echoing through the rocks. I had no memory of what caused me to scream. The sky was just beginning to lighten on the eastern horizon. Duke was nowhere near me. My leash was snapped in half. Terror shot through me. I scrambled to my feet, calling his name. Instead of Duke, I saw a shape on the hillside about 50 yards away. By the growing dawn, I recognized it immediately. Lucas. He was standing near a juniper tree, and pinned against the trunk was Duke. A spike, an iron spike I'd never seen before, had been driven through my dog's torso, nailing him upright to the wood. Blood soaked his fur, glistening in the early light. Duke's eyes were still open, a flicker of recognition passing over them as I stumbled toward him. He whimpered, a faint, agonized sound. My stomach lurched and horror seized every cell in my body. Rage replaced fear. I grabbed a rock from the ground, large and jagged, and charged Lucas, tears streaming down my face. But the moment I was within a few feet, he sidestepped gracefully, letting me crash into the tree trunk. My shoulder jolted with impact, and I dropped the rock. "You see, James," Lucas said, his voice almost gentle, "it doesn't have to be this way, but you chose defiance." I turned to Duke, who was still pinned, twitching feebly. The rational part of me knew what had to be done, but it tore my heart out. With trembling arms, I grabbed another rock and bashed the spike in a desperate attempt to free him. Duke let out a sound of such pain that I almost lost my grip. Blood splattered my clothes. Realizing I was only prolonging his agony, I did the only thing I could. I delivered a mercy blow to his skull with the rock, tears blurring my vision as I forced myself to end his suffering. My soul felt like it was ripping in half. When Duke finally went limp, I dropped to my knees and sobbed uncontrollably. Lucas stood a few yards away, watching in silence. I expected him to taunt me, but he merely observed, hands folded as though at a solemn funeral. My dog, my best friend, was gone. After a few minutes, I rose, covered in Duke's blood, and stared at Lucas with pure hatred. My mind was blank except for the throbbing need to make him pay. I lunged for the tent stake that was still tucked in my belt, yanking it free. Lucas let me come closer this time. I swung the stake upward in a wild arc, aiming for his chest. He caught my wrist with impossible strength, burning pain erupting where his fingers touched me. "Good," he whispered. "Let your hate guide you." My arm felt like it was on fire. I screamed, tried to pull free, but his grip was unbreakable. He twisted my wrist until I dropped the stake. Then he stepped closer, pressing his forehead to mine. I could smell sulfur on his breath. He leaned in to speak right into my ear, his voice both quiet and terrifying. "Just one more sin, James. Kill yourself, or stay forever." His words sent shockwaves through my mind. I saw flickers of impossible images, bodies hanging from trees, storms of ash, my own face contorted in torment. I must have blacked out or time somehow slipped again, because the next thing I knew he was gone, and I was alone with Duke's corpse in a haze of half-light. The morning sun eventually rose high enough to banish the lingering shadows. My face felt caked with salt from tears, my arms and chest streaked with blood. I knew I had to leave that place or die, yet some sick part of me wondered if I was already dead, wandering a hellish loop of my worst fears. I stumbled down the slope, half delirious, seeing illusions. I heard my voice echoing, but with a delay, as if I were shouting into a canyon. My own screams repeated back at me. I glimpsed shapes in my peripheral vision. A second me, hanging from a tree or walking behind me. Once, I turned around and swore I saw a figure that looked exactly like me, eyes glazed, dangling from a thick rope. But when I blinked, it vanished, leaving me breathless and trembling. At some point, I found myself by my campsite again, which shouldn't have been possible if I'd been walking away from it. The tent was partially collapsed, the fire ring scattered. My journal lay open on the ground. Pages were turning in a wind I couldn't feel. I snatched it up and read more lines in my handwriting. "He is your reflection. You are your own demon. Kill or be killed. You'll never leave." I wanted to burn the journal right then and there, but a twisted logic told me it was my only proof that I hadn't imagined everything. I stuffed it into my pack, ignoring the hateful words. Then I noticed something else. In the ashes of the fire pit lay shards of glass from a lantern I'd used on the first night. Most of the fuel had spilled, but some still remained in the small canister. I found a spark of desperate hope. Maybe I could use it as a weapon. My plan was hardly a plan at all. If Lucas appeared again, I would douse him in lantern fuel and set him on fire. I had to try something. My mind felt shredded, my body even worse. Bruises and minor cuts covered me from all my stumbling and panicked scrambles. I half limped, half crawled around the campsite, searching for anything that could be used to my advantage. Sure enough, towards dusk, I sensed him before I actually saw him. An electric tension in the air. I prepared the broken lantern canister, holding it behind my back with one hand, the tent stake in the other. My heart battered against my ribs. Lucas emerged from behind a boulder like a drifting shadow, the same neutral grin on his lips. "You should have left," he said softly. "You had the chance." I said nothing, moving back toward the fire pit as if cornered. He advanced slowly. His eyes gleamed with an otherworldly brightness. I waited until he was within arm's length. Then I threw the lantern fuel in his face and struck the flint I kept on my keychain. A spark flashed. Flames erupted, latching onto him in a flash of heat. He screamed, a terrible sound that reminded me of a dying animal, or a siren, something inhuman. His face twisted, and I saw momentarily a glimpse of something far older, far uglier than the rugged man's form he wore. He clawed at the flames, staggering away, letting out that piercing shriek. I seized the moment to grab the stake and drive it into his shoulder. The metal sank into flesh, and he howled, writhing in agony. For the first time, I felt the power shift in my favor. My fear gave way to a savage triumph. He collapsed on one knee, the fire dancing around him, but as I watched, the flames extinguished almost on their own, leaving half of his face scorched and blistered. For a moment, he looked up at me with an expression that was less anger, more amusement. Then he whispered something I couldn't make out, and darkness seemed to swirl around him, as if the shadows themselves wrapped him in an embrace. The next instant he was gone. Not just out of sight, gone, as though he had never been there. I didn't wait around to see what would happen next. I staggered away, ignoring my injuries, ignoring the campsite, ignoring Duke's body pinned to the tree far above. I just ran, sometimes stumbling and crawling, until I found a dry wash that led me to a dirt road. By full dark, I was half conscious, delirious from thirst, fighting to keep moving. At some point, headlights cut through the darkness, and a pickup truck rattled to a stop. I barely registered a man jumping out, calling to me, asking if I was hurt. Then everything went black. I woke in a small medical clinic in Decaying, New Mexico, with an IV in my arm and bandages around my burned wrist. I had no idea how much time had passed. A local deputy came by later to ask questions. I told him I'd been attacked by someone in the mountains, that I'd lost my dog, that my vehicle was trashed. He listened with polite skepticism, but I could see he didn't believe the more bizarre details. He chalked it up to dehydration, delirium, and possibly an encounter with a lunatic drifter. They found my truck as I described. Tires slashed, sides scratched up. No sign of Duke or any iron spikes. No sign of foul play other than the vandalism. A search party briefly went out, but they found nothing. My campsite was dismantled, the tent shredded, but no footprints or blood. And certainly no sign of a man named Lucas. I left the clinic a few days later, physically on the mend but mentally haunted. The staff gave me back my belongings, including my journal. I flipped through it, expecting to see the horrifying entries. Instead, every page was blank except for my own normal notes from the first 2 days. The insane scribbles, the ominous messages, they were gone. I returned to Dallas soon after, forced to accept that I might never know what truly happened out there. Despite all logic, I'm convinced I was the victim of something beyond any human explanation, something old, predatory, and cruel. Some nights, I still dream of Duke nailed to that tree whimpering for me to save him. Other nights, I hear Lucas's voice whispering, "Just one more sin. Kill yourself or stay forever." There is an epilogue of sorts. In my apartment, I keep the journal in a box. Sometimes I hear it rustle late at night, as though pages are turning on their own. Twice now, I've smelled a faint whiff of sulfur. And once in the bathroom mirror, I swear I saw my eyes reflecting a dim red glow. It vanished when I blinked. I try to convince myself it's trauma, that my mind is making sense of tragedy in the only way it can. But a deeper part of me wonders if Lucas somehow burned a brand into my soul. If, by wounding him, I invited something far worse into my life. Maybe he never truly left me. Maybe I never truly left Mahoney Park. All I know is that I survived, and part of me regrets it. If survival means living with the knowledge of what I saw, what I did, and who I lost, then maybe I paid a heavier price than I can bear. Sometimes I catch myself smiling too long at my reflection, or forgetting simple memories, like my mother's birthday or my high school. And I think of Lucas, that calm, unblinking stare. I think of how Duke wouldn't go near him, and how, in the end, Duke died for it. If you're reading this, wondering if I've lost my mind, I can't blame you. But do one thing for me. If ever you find yourself alone in the Florida mountains, or anywhere the land feels ancient and unkind, and a stranger appears with an ageless grin, always blinking too little, don't share your fire, don't share your food, and don't let him get close. Because once he does, you might never truly leave. And even if you do, some part of you will stay behind, howling into the desert wind, pinned to a nightmare that time itself can't erase. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 30 years old when this happened, in October of 2023. It's taken months for me to wrap my head around what occurred in the ravines of Torreya State Park, but I'll do my best to recount it. I want to be clear, if you're looking for logic or a neat ending, you won't find either here. I still don't know how much was real, how much was something else, and whether the horror followed me out or stayed behind with the bones. I decided to go on this trip because my life in Orlando was suffocating. I'm a freelance graphic designer, or I was. Things had stalled, both in my career and in my personal life. I'd just gone through a breakup. My boyfriend of 3 years left me, calling me unreachable and too closed off. It still stings. I'd spent the last 2 months holed up in my tiny apartment, ignoring phone calls from friends, eating freezer meals, and accepting random design gigs that barely paid the bills. Then my old college friend Gwen called and insisted that I get some fresh air. She wanted a girls' trip. She said we should go camping, that she'd heard about a hidden trail near Torreya State Park in the Florida Panhandle. I had initially wanted to go alone. The quiet appealed to me, the chance to disconnect from everything. Gwen had always been adventurous. She was the one who got us into trouble in college, the one who dyed her hair pink for no reason, who got strange tattoos in hidden places. She had a fresh tattoo that she wouldn't talk about, somewhere on her left rib cage. When I pressed her about it during the drive, she just laughed and said, "I'll show you some other time." We drove up in her SUV. It was early October, humid with a sticky warmth in the afternoons but cooler at night. The two of us had never been to Torreya State Park. I just knew from a bit of reading that it featured steep bluffs and deep ravines, an unusual topography for Florida. The woods were rumored to be dense and quiet. Some campers swore the area felt haunted, even before you set foot on the trails. That didn't deter Gwen. She had an odd gleam in her eye, like she had some inside joke I wasn't privy to. On the way there, we lost phone reception intermittently. We had downloaded offline maps, or so we thought, but we ended up relying on a combination of a road map Gwen had printed out and the occasional 3G signal that flickered in and out. She kept referencing an old forum post that described a secret trail branching off the official ones. She said, "I heard that if you follow the ravine at dusk, you'll find these giant cypress trees, some of them hundreds of years old. Supposed to be magical." The moment we stepped out of the SUV, I felt an immediate sense of isolation. The air felt oddly thick, the sky tinted with an early evening pinkish hue. I turned my phone on to check the time, 4 in the afternoon, but my battery was at 9%. I'd charged it in the car, so it should have been near full. Gwen shrugged when I pointed this out. Her phone was in the same condition. We chalked it up to failing car chargers. We decided to make camp at one of the designated sites near the main trailhead, but Gwen kept saying, "We shouldn't settle for the normal spots. Let's go deeper." I insisted we at least sleep close to the car for night 1, get a feel for the place before going off to some unlisted trail. We pitched our small tent near a cluster of palmettos. There was one other campsite in sight, but it looked empty, as if people had planned to camp there and then changed their minds. I lit a small fire, and we roasted a couple of sandwiches we'd packed. Night fell quickly, heavier than I expected. By 8, it felt closer to midnight. No moon, no stars. Just a choking blackness. You couldn't even see the outline of trees beyond our firelight. We tried to get some sleep. Gwen was scrolling through her phone until the battery died completely around 9. I'd put my own phone on airplane mode to save that last bit of power, but it also dropped to 0 sometime after. Every time I woke, I'd see Gwen tossing and turning. She was muttering in her sleep. Something about it wants us to stay. Morning came, but my watch said it was 6 when the sky already looked bright enough for 8. I tried to shrug it off. Cheap watch, maybe, but it started a chain of small, unsettling details. My water had a metallic taste. My food smelled off even though I'd bought it just 2 days prior. Gwen's eyes looked bloodshot, and she smiled too much, the expression not quite reaching her face. She was awake before me, rummaging in her bag, tying her hair in a ponytail. "Ready?" she asked. "Let's find that ravine." She sounded breathless, on edge. We set off with our backpacks, a printed map that didn't show the hidden trail, and a half-charged GPS device that Gwen swore worked better than our phones. But by midday, the GPS flickered and lost our position. The compass on my watch kept swinging from north to east. The park's ravines were steep and covered in a fog that rolled in unexpectedly. When we stopped for lunch, cold sandwiches we'd stashed in a cooler, the bread tasted sour, and the turkey had a weird, slimy film. Gwen spat hers out. "Guess it's spoiled," she said, but it made no sense. The cooler was full of ice that morning, still half frozen. Eventually, Gwen started scanning the tree line on the edges of the main trail. She found a thin footpath that broke away, half hidden by wild ferns. "This has to be it," she insisted. I asked if she was sure. She nodded, eyes bright. "This is the ravine that leads to the old cypress." She pointed at a detail on the printed forum post. I wasn't comfortable going off trail, but she was already stepping over roots, pushing aside branches. I followed, not wanting to leave her alone out there. That was my first real mistake. The deeper we went, the more humid the air became. Everything smelled of decaying leaves and damp soil. The path wound downward, crossing streams that cut deep into the limestone. The sunlight above seemed to dim, even though it was still mid-afternoon by my watch. Every half hour or so, I'd try to check our position. The compass pin spun, and the analog watch face lagged behind the motion of its second hand. It was as if time itself was running in fits and starts. Then we saw the cypress. If you've never been to North Florida, you might picture cypress trees as tall, thick, with knobby knees rising out of water. But this one was monstrous, covered in a kind of pale fungus, its trunk so gnarled it looked like a giant fist bursting from the earth. Dozens of twisted branches bent outward, and hanging from those branches were objects. Bones. They formed little wind chimes, clacking softly in the minimal breeze. Some were small, maybe animal bones, but others looked larger, long and curved, suspiciously close to the size of a human femur. There were also jars or pouches made from some type of hide, swaying as if something inside them shifted. An intense wave of nausea washed over me. Gwen walked closer, transfixed. I hissed, "Stop! Don't touch anything," but she brushed me off. "This is definitely the place," she said. As she reached out to move a cluster of bones aside, one cut her palm. She yelped, jerking her hand back. Blood trickled down onto her wrist. She sucked in a breath, pressed her shirt to it, and laughed nervously. I felt no urge to laugh. The hair on my arms stood on end, and I realized how silent the ravine was. No birds, no insects, just the soft chime of bones. Part of me wanted to grab Gwen and run, but she was determined. We eventually decided to make camp on a small flat area a few hundred feet from that horrible tree. Neither of us wanted to pitch the tent right under those rattling bones. We set up quickly as dusk approached. The sun was at a strange angle. My watch read 5, but the horizon showed that fierce orange glow you normally see closer to 7. I tried to spark a campfire with my flint and steel, but the wood Gwen collected was damp. We used a small can of camp fuel to help it catch. Even so, the flame would flicker a sickly greenish hue before settling to normal. Gwen told me it was probably chemicals in the wood. Our first real confrontation came after we'd eaten a bit of leftover trail mix for dinner. Night seemed to envelop us in a single blink. The final threads of daylight vanished, as though someone had switched off a lamp. When I checked my watch, it said it was still 5:45 p.m. I laughed shakily. "It's at least 8, I said. Gwen just shrugged. She was staring off in the direction of the cypress. Around what I guessed was midnight, I woke up from a restless doze to find my sleeping bag open. Strange part? It was unzipped from the inside, but I was still lying in it. I sat up. The tent flap was partially undone, letting in a sliver of moonlight. Gwen was gone. Panic struck me, but then I saw her silhouette near the fire, her back to me. She was barefoot, her shoulders stiff, face turned toward the darkness. Her hair was down around her shoulders, and she was humming something so softly I could barely hear. I unzipped the tent fully, stepped out, and called her name. "Gwen, are you okay?" She turned around with a sudden jerk, wearing this too-wide smile. "Couldn't sleep," she said. Her voice was raspy. I noticed her eyes. The pupils seemed dilated, no matter that the night was dark. She held her hands to the fire as if warming them. My skin prickled. It was a warm Florida night. No need for extra warmth. "Have you been out here long?" I asked. Gwen just blinked too slow and responded, "A while," then turned her attention back to the flickering embers. A sick feeling knotted in my stomach. Gwen was acting wrong, and I wasn't sure if it was from exhaustion or something else. I tried to settle back to sleep, but every time I drifted off, I dreamed of Marnie Cray. Although I didn't know her name yet, my dream showed me an ancient woman crouching inside the cypress trunk. She was rail-thin, almost skeletal, her skin see-through, wrinkled, and her hair like Spanish moss. Each time I got close, she'd open her mouth and exhale a moist, rotting smell. Then I'd see Gwen's face swallowing the darkness, bones chattering in the branches above her. I snapped awake countless times, heart hammering. In the morning, if you can call it that, I found Gwen kneeling on the ground near the remains of the fire. She'd laid her left hand flat, palm open, gazing at the cut from the night before. It was rimmed with an angry red infection. She said nothing as I approached. I crouched beside her, reached for our first aid kit, and cleaned it as best I could. No matter how much antiseptic I applied, the wound bled fresh, bright red. By the time I wrapped it, the bandage was already stained. Gwen just muttered something about "the tree wants me." I tried to ignore it. Our supplies had gone bad overnight. Our freeze-dried meals, moldy lumps. The jerky was covered in a greasy film that smelled acrid. Worse, the water in our canteens had a metallic tang, and chunks of something floated in Gwen's. In the light of day, the ravine looked suffused with a pale haze that made it hard to judge distances. The cypress tree seemed bigger, or maybe we'd just been too frightened to notice its size before. One side of the trunk had an open hollow. I glimpsed a flicker of movement inside, like a hand or a cluster of roots twisting. I told myself it was just a branch or a trick of the shadows. We made a decision. We'd leave immediately. There was no reason to stay in that cursed spot. I told Gwen we were going to find the main trail if it took us all day. Gwen seemed reluctant. "Why do you want to go so soon?" she asked. "It's just a weird tree." The question disturbed me. Yesterday she had seemed spooked. Now she acted as though she wanted to linger. But eventually she agreed to help pack up camp. That was easier said than done. Each time we walked in what should have been the direction back to the main trail, we'd round a bend, crest a small slope, and back at the same spot. The cypress loomed, or the bone chimes swayed overhead. Twice I found we had circled around to the exact place we started. I heard those bones clacking in the faint breeze, and my chest constricted. I felt like the park had turned into a maze where every path led back to that nightmare. By midday, according to my useless watch anyway, Gwen started snapping at me for being too negative. My frustration rose. "Negative? We're clearly lost," I said. "No, we're not lost," she replied with a weird edge to her voice. "We just need to accept it." Accept? The word stuck with me, sending a chill through me. We stopped for a break. The little bit of water I managed to sip made me gag. It tasted like pennies and something foul, like pond scum. Then Gwen admitted something. "I came here for a reason, Claire." I thought she just meant a general reason, like a desire to break routine, but she went on. "I found an online group talking about Marnie Cray, an old witch or hag that's supposed to haunt this place." I thought she trailed off. I demanded she clarify. She shook her head. "Some people said Marnie can fix you or break you, but if you come with a friend, you can share the burden." A spasm ran through her face like a flinch she tried to hide. I didn't think it would be this real. I just stared. So that was it. She dragged me here because she'd been obsessing over some local legend about a swamp hag who grants boons or curses. My anger flared, but at the same time, fear overshadowed it. We needed to get out, but we couldn't. The trails made no sense. The GPS was a dead chunk of plastic and my phone was worthless. It grew dark again, impossibly early, and we found ourselves near that cypress tree once more. For all my wanting to leave, we had no choice but to set up camp a second time. I refused to pitch the tent close to the trunk, so we dragged our gear a few hundred feet away, next to a massive fallen log. Our attempt at a fire was pitiful. The wood sizzled and emitted a putrid smoke. Eventually, a flame sputtered to life, but it was cold comfort. Gwen rummaged in her pockets and found a single protein bar. We split it in half. The taste was off, as if even that had spoiled. By the faint glow of the fire, Gwen rummaged in her own backpack and pulled out an old, battered notebook. Her journal, she called it. She ripped out several pages and fed them to the flames. She said nothing, just watched the pages curl into ash. Something about that unsettled me more than the rotting food. It felt like a slow unraveling of the Gwen I knew. Sleep came sporadically. When I woke, the fire was green again, sputtering in a circle of muddy stones. Gwen stood on the other side, staring at it. I blinked and realized my sleeping bag was once again unzipped from within. My heart hammered. I'd been so tired I didn't even notice if I had moved in my sleep or if someone or something had undone it. I tried to quell the panic, telling myself it was just me flailing in the night. I looked at Gwen, silhouetted by that sickly flame. "You okay?" I asked. Her answer was a long silence. Finally, she said, "The tree wants me to stay." I scolded her, told her she was scaring me with that nonsense. She didn't respond. Her face was unreadable, the reflection of the flames making her pupils flicker. Come morning, Gwen was gone. So was her sleeping bag. Her boots sat neatly at the foot of the tent, which didn't make sense because why would she leave without them? She'd injure herself on the rough terrain. I called her name until my voice was raw. No reply. In a rising panic, I took the day pack with what little gear we had left and ventured toward the cypress. Halfway there, I heard someone puking. Behind a cluster of ferns, Gwen was bent double, retching blackish stuff that smelled like old blood and decay. She choked, gasped, and wiped her mouth. Her eyes locked on me, and for a moment, she looked like a cornered animal. Then she mumbled an apology and stumbled away. I tried to go after her, but she moved with surprising speed, weaving between the trees. Eventually, I caught up, gently grabbed her arm. "We're going to get help," I said. "We'll follow the ravine's edge. It has to lead us out." She breathed heavily, nodding, but her expression was absent, like she wasn't really there. For a moment, her jaw seemed to unhinge too wide, and I wondered if I was hallucinating. The next second, it was normal again. And so began hours of me guiding us in what I hoped was the correct direction. Every so often, Gwen would mutter strange words, something like, "She's under my skin," or, "The bones are hungry." Other times, she was chatty, talking about old memories we'd shared in college. Then she'd freeze and give me a blank look, as if she didn't know me at all. The temperature fluctuated too. One moment it was stiflingly hot, the next I'd shiver in a sudden chill. I thought I heard bells or chimes, but every time I asked Gwen, she looked at me like I was crazy. Late in the day, I'm guessing, it began to drizzle. The water soaked us, making the ravine floor slick. In the distance, I heard the jingle of bones. We walked faster, hoping to outrun that sound. Instead, we circled back to the cypress, as if the park had folded in on itself. That's when I lost it. I stomped around the trunk, screaming at the sky, cursing the bones, cursing Gwen, cursing everything. I shouted, "What do you want from us?" The feeling of being watched was so acute that I half expected a voice to answer. Instead, Gwen sighed and said, "She wants me. You too, if you stay. I'm so sorry, Claire." A sudden jolt of fear shot through me. She was apologizing for bringing me here, or maybe for something else. My thoughts raced. Was there a plan? Did Gwen come here intending to sacrifice me to this presence? My fear took shape as anger, and I confronted her. She just gripped my arm with icy fingers and said, "I didn't think it would go this far. I thought we'd each get something out of it, something we needed. Our confrontation ended abruptly when a moaning wind rattled the bone chimes overhead, loud as thunder in the silence. Gwen's face went blank, eyes rolling back for a second. I watched in horror as she dropped to her knees, gripping the tree's rough bark. A moment later, she slumped to the ground, unconscious or close to it. I panicked, tried to lift her, but the moment I touched her shoulders, she jerked away with unnatural strength. Her lips curled in a snarl I'd never seen before. Then she scurried away toward the hollow of the trunk. It was so fast and so inhuman I was left breathless. I followed, half crawling. Inside the hollow was a space about 5 feet high, a cavity in the trunk. It smelled like rotting fruit, excrement, and old meat. By the wan light that filtered in, I saw shapes leaning against the walls. Decaying remains of animals, maybe. Or not just animals. My breath caught in my throat because I recognized a human hand. Skin, blackened and shriveled. The bones of that hand jutted out through splits in the flesh. Something had gnawed the fingertips. I nearly vomited. Gwen was crouched against the far side, rummaging among the detritus. She was muttering words I couldn't catch. Then she slid something aside and I saw them. Bodies. Maybe half a dozen, all in various states of decomposition. Some were staked upright by thick roots that grew through their torsos. Others lay in heaps, contorted as if tossed aside. A wave of horror hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment blackness rimmed my vision. I was sure I'd faint. A scraping noise behind me made me whirl around. I saw the silhouette of a woman, skeletal, tall, but hunched. Her skin was a translucent gray, clinging to her bones. She wore a tattered black dress that looked more like rotting seaweed and Spanish moss. This figure's hair hung in clumps, trailing on the ground. 2 watery eyes stared at me, blinking black tears. Somehow, I knew I was face to face with Marnie Cray, the swamp hag who haunted this land. She opened her mouth. A slick, choking sound came out, then a voice that sounded like 100 throats whispering at once. "You came to me. A bargain was made. Now pay." My brain couldn't process the words. I scrambled backwards, slipped on something slimy. Gwen was behind me, or a version of Gwen that was shaking, convulsing, eyes rolled back. Marnie moved in a slow, deliberate glide, but the air around her felt heavy, pressing on my lungs. The entire interior of that trunk felt twisted in space, as if gravity didn't behave normally. In a desperate burst, I heaved Gwen to her feet, ignoring her groans of protest. We staggered out of the hollow. My legs churned, trying to flee, but the ground was thick with mud, dead leaves, and lumps of old bones. At some point, I lost my grip on Gwen, who fell face first into the muck. I whirled around to help her, but she spun onto her back, spitting water and debris. I saw her eyes again, fully black, with no sclera. I screamed her name. She let out a choked laugh. I can't entirely articulate the sequence that followed. Time was warping too strangely. It felt like hours of terror compressed into minutes. Gwen lurched toward me, her jaw slack, cheeks pale. Then, as if possessed by some other presence, she grabbed my arm in a crushing grip and tried to drag me back to the tree. She was chanting something. Her voice was overlapping, as if more than one person spoke at once. In that delirium, adrenaline flooded me. I swung my camp shovel, small but sturdy, straight into the side of Gwen's head. I didn't aim to kill her. I just wanted to break free. She staggered, releasing me. Blackish fluid oozed from a gash at her temple, but she barely seemed to register pain. Instead, she hissed, "It's in me now." Her voice cracked. My rational mind warred with my horror. "Gwen, you're sick. We need to get out of here." She responded by lunging again. This time, I swung the shovel at her legs. I saw an opening to run, so I bolted up the slope, ignoring the burning pain in my calves and the twisted root that nearly tripped me. I heard squelching footsteps behind me. Turning back, I saw Gwen following, face twisted in rage and hunger. The only advantage I had was that she moved haltingly, like a puppet on broken strings. Suddenly, she laughed, the sound high and shrill. "He was right to leave you," she spat. Her voice was Marnie's voice, or something else. "You were already hollow." My anger flared again, fueling me. Part of me hated that it still hurt to hear about my ex, even from a monstrous, possessed best friend. We came to a small clearing above the ravine. The bones of old trees were everywhere, bleached logs and stumps. A stench of sulfur. Gwen lunged, and I swung the shovel with both hands, connecting with her collarbone. The crack was sickening. She let out an inhuman cry, collapsed onto her knees. For a split second, her black eyes cleared, and she stared at me with raw agony. "Kill me," she whispered, tears cutting tracks in the mud on her face. "Please, before it takes me back." A rush of sorrow almost undid me. This was my friend. The girl who used to belt out karaoke tunes in our dorm, who once got me out of a speeding ticket by making the officer laugh. Now, she was hollow. A shell. The blackness in her eyes welled again, like an ink blot. She snarled and tried to stand. I swung the shovel upward in a desperate arc, striking the bottom of her jaw. The impact felt sickening, bones snapping. She flew backwards onto the ground. Gwen lay there, choking on blood and whatever that black fluid was, convulsing. A wave of revulsion and heartbreak washed over me, but I advanced. I saw her hands twitch, the fingers looking elongated, almost like roots themselves. She was still alive, still possessed. Her eyes rolled to look at me. "End it," she whispered, her voice flickering between Gwen's normal tone and something deeper. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I know there was no other choice. I lifted a large stone, one of many that lined the clearing, and brought it down on her head. Twice. 3 times. By the time I realized she wasn't moving, I was sobbing, shoulders shaking, blood spattering my arms. Gwen's head was unrecognizable, caved in. I stumbled away, the reality of what I'd done hitting me like a freight train. I vomited on the ground, trembling violently. When I finally forced myself to look back, Gwen's body lay sprawled in an unnatural position. But that black fluid no longer oozed from her. Maybe it had retreated back into the forest, or maybe I had banished it by fracturing her skull. I didn't feel relief, I felt hollow. I told myself I'd saved her from an unspeakable fate, but the guilt and horror would never leave me. Time blurred again after that. My watch face was cracked, showing random digits that didn't align to anything. I staggered away from Gwen's remains, half limping. I had a broken rib, I think, or at least that's how it felt. A hot, tearing pain in my side with every step. My breath was shallow. Maybe I would die out there. At some point, I found a shallow creek. I gulped the water despite the rancid aftertaste. I stumbled along it, trying to follow it downstream. My mind was half gone, replaying images of Gwen's last moments. The bones overhead still clacked, or maybe that was just the memory of them. Twigs snapped and the wind sighed, and I pictured Marnie Cray behind every tree, reaching for me with bony claws. The next thing I remember clearly was reaching a different trail, one that looked wide and packed down, with signs of recent footprints. My heart soared. The land around me seemed more like the normal forest you'd expect in a Florida state park. Less fog, more open sky. My sense of time was scrambled, though. The sun was high, or maybe low, or maybe it wasn't the sun at all. My eyes stung with sweat and tears. I must have collapsed at some point because I woke to the sight of a park ranger leaning over me. He had short brown hair, a concerned expression. His uniform said F. Wilcox. I tried to speak, but only a hoarse croak emerged. The ranger gave me water, real water, from a canteen. It tasted almost sweet compared to the filth in the ravine. I tried to warn him about what was back there, about Gwen. My words came out in a rush of sobs. My friend, she's dead. I had to. The tree, Marnie Cray. He shushed me gently, telling me I was dehydrated and likely hallucinating. I didn't have the energy to argue. He radioed for medical help, and soon I was strapped to a stretcher. The ambulance ride was a blur. Paramedics flashed lights in my eyes, pressed stethoscopes to my chest. I do recall one odd thing. I looked at the ranger's eyes when he loaded me in, and for a split second I saw Gwen's dark stare. But that might have been my traumatized mind playing tricks. I woke in a hospital bed. A nurse told me I'd been found near the edge of the official trails, suffering from severe dehydration, minor lacerations, and 2 fractured ribs. They asked me about my friend. I told them the truth, or tried to. The authorities never found Gwen's body, nor a cypress tree with bones. They combed the area, but apparently it can be tricky to search every nook of those ravines. Officially, Gwen is listed as missing, presumed dead. My statement was met with pity and mild disbelief. How could I have trekked so far from the designated trails with no gear? I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Sometimes, in the corner of the room at night, I thought I saw a shape, huddled, dripping with black fluid. But each time I blinked, it was gone. The nightmares are a fixture of my nights now, overshadowed only by the guilt and the terror of wondering if I was truly free. People tried to comfort me by saying it was some sort of mania caused by exposure, dehydration, toxic plants, or contaminated water. That maybe Gwen wandered off and is still out there somewhere. But I know what I saw. In the weeks after my release, I returned to my apartment in Orlando. But I couldn't sleep without hearing the clacking of bones, that moaning wind, or Gwen's last words. End it. Sometimes I'll wake up at night and my sheets are unwrapped from inside, as if someone crawled out while I slept. Or I'll glance at the clock and see it skipping backward for a moment, though I'm sure that must be my imagination. A few times I've found small bones strung up in my living room, like ornaments. I'll blink and they're gone. Maybe I'm dreaming, or maybe some part of that forest followed me home. 4 months have passed since I left Torreya State Park. My ribs have healed, but the mental wounds never will. People ask me what really happened, and I just say, we got lost. My friend died. Most don't press for details. I don't blame them. If they'd seen the bones swaying in the moonlight, if they'd smelled the rotting flesh in the hollow of that cypress, or heard the multi-voiced whisper of that hag. No one wants to believe such things can happen in a place open to the public, in modern America, with all our technology, but it did happen. I have the scars and the nightmares as proof. Sometimes I think about going back, about finding Gwen's remains to give her a proper burial. The very thought sends my heart pounding, though. I can't face that place. Even if I had a squad of armed men with me, I'd still see Marnie Cray in every shadow, waiting to pull me back into that nightmare. I tried to do some research after the fact. I found references to a local legend in old Florida folklore collections, mentioning a Cray family rumored to practice dark arts, and a woman named Marnie who vanished sometime in the early 1900s. Some stories said she made a pact with a demon, others said she was cursed by a spurned lover. None of the stories mentioned the cypress with bones, but a handful of forum posts I uncovered, posts that matched what Gwen had read, spoke of a bone tree near Torreya's ravines. Most people dismissed it as an urban legend. I wish it was. I've considered moving away, heading north or out west, Anywhere that's not Florida. But I can't bring myself to pack my bags. It feels like running would do no good. The dread is inside me now. Sometimes, in the mirror, I see a flicker of black in my eyes. I worry it's the same force that took Gwen. But every time I blink, it's gone. Maybe it's just the trauma. Maybe it's something more. Writing this down is my attempt at exercising the memory. I doubt it'll work. People will read it, if they ever do, and assume it's fiction. If you're reading and you find yourself drawn to Torreya State Park, or you read about the bone tree online, do yourself a favor. Stay away. No photograph or blog post can capture the crawling dread that nestles in your gut when you see those bones swaying in the silent air. And if you feel that need for something you think a witch in the woods can give you, healing, revenge, redemption, remember that the price might be more than you can bear. I can't change what happened. I can't bring Gwen back. Perhaps I never will know if she realized at the last moment that she'd made the worst mistake of her life. All I know is that the final, desperate look in her eyes, right before I ended it, was an odd mixture of relief and terror. She wanted release, but something inside her wasn't done feeding. I've ended up alone as I'd been before. The difference is, now the loneliness is tainted by the memory of blood and betrayal. Sometimes, in my nightmares, I see Gwen among the twisted bodies in that hollow trunk, her jaw cracked open, a black tear running down her cheek. She's chanting, "You brought me here," over and over, even though it was she who initiated this journey. Maybe it's my guilt rewriting the truth, or maybe it's Marnie's voice continuing to sow division from beyond. And what if Marnie Cray is still out there, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting hikers? What if they find that secret trail Gwen was so obsessed with, lured by the same superstitions or lust for answers? The bones will still be rattling in the branches, the wind will still moan through the ravine, and time will still slip sideways in that cursed place. I guess that's why I'm sharing this. Some stories should never be retold, but ignorance can be more dangerous. I want someone, anyone, to understand that if they see references to a hidden ravine and an ancient cypress draped in bones, they need to turn around and go back, no matter what. Don't be curious, don't be brave, because once you cross that threshold, there's no guarantee you'll ever leave, and if you do, you might not be the same. Or, like me, you might leave a piece of your soul behind, buried under the hush of those cypress branches, in the shadow of Marnie Cray. To this day, I still can't sleep with the windows open. One night, not long ago, I swore I heard bone chimes faintly in the breeze outside my apartment. I lay awake, eyes wide, drenched in sweat, until dawn washed away the terror. My counselor says it's PTSD, that it'll get better with time, but time doesn't feel normal anymore. Time feels warped, the same way it did under those branches. Sometimes minutes pass like hours. Sometimes entire days vanish without memory. I'll blink, and it's night. I'll close my eyes, and it's morning. I'm afraid that one day I'll open them and find myself back in that ravine, as if I never really escaped. If there's a moral to all this, I suppose it's that some secrets aren't worth uncovering. Some legends should remain legends, unverified. Gwen wanted to fix something in herself, or maybe in both of us, but the cost was my best friend's life, and the cost to me was a permanent scar on my mind. Perhaps the real tragedy is that we both came to this place wounded, me from my breakup and crippling self-doubt, Gwen from whatever haunted her nights, and we hoped a dark magic might heal us. Instead, we unleashed something far worse. I don't know where Marnie Cray came from, or whether she's truly a witch, a demon, or some ancient spirit of those Florida ravines. I only know she thrives on pain and fear. She latched onto Gwen's desire for a cure and twisted it. Gwen's last lucid request, "Kill me," still echoes in my head. I wonder if her soul found peace or if she's trapped in that hollow, entangled in the roots forever. Sometimes I question whether I should have tried to save her, to drag her out of the ravine instead of killing her. But when she looked at me with those blackened eyes, I knew the Gwen I loved was already gone. That knowledge doesn't help me sleep. It just keeps me awake, replaying the sequence of events that brought me to that monstrous act. I see now that life goes on, but it's a half-life for me. My therapist suggests forming new friendships, but I can't. I see flickers of Marnie's grin in every stranger's face. I see bits of Gwen in every woman I pass on the street. The world feels hollow, as if it's only a reflection of something else. Sometimes I feel a compulsion to buy supplies, gas cans, a lighter, and drive back to Torreya, to burn that tree to the ground, destroy whatever evil lives there. But I know I wouldn't survive the attempt. The park rangers would stop me, or the forest itself would. So here I am, stuck in a kind of limbo, hoping that speaking my truth in these words might bring me a fraction of peace. Even if no one believes me, even if they write this off as a twisted campfire tale, at least I've gotten it out of my head and onto a page. That might be enough. I still have Gwen's necklace from college, a little silver disc with a pressed flower inside. It turned black after the trip. The once yellow petals rotted and dark. I keep it in a drawer, telling myself every day I should throw it away. Yet, I can't bring myself to do it. It's my last connection to the friend I lost. Maybe one day I'll bury it by her old house in Gainesville, or toss it in Lake Eola, but not today. Sometimes I catch myself whispering the word "stay," the same thing Gwen repeated in her delirium. It unnerves me. I'll realize I'm humming it under my breath, even at the grocery store or in the shower, as if a piece of that presence is still lodged under my skin. Then I'll stop, heart pounding, and remind myself I'm free of that ravine. But am I? I've had moments of near clarity, the edges of my fear receding, only for a wave of black guilt to crash over me a day later. I think this is my life now, forever teetering between normalcy and madness, with Marnie Cray's whisper lingering in the background. Maybe that's why I haven't left Florida. Part of me fears she can reach me wherever I go. Another part wonders if there's some final confrontation waiting, one I can't outrun. If that moment comes, I pray I'll be strong enough to face it without bringing anyone else into the nightmare. The last thing I'll say is that if anyone ever confesses to you a secret obsession with old folklore, with dark witches and remote parks, or with rumors of a bone tree draped in the remains of lost souls, believe them enough to keep them from going. Curiosity kills, but in this case, it can do much worse than kill. It can twist souls, destroy friendships, and warp time itself. So, that's my story. My name is Claire Bennett, and I was 30 when this happened, just a few months ago, in October of 2023. If you ever find yourself in Torreya State Park and see a faint path veering off the main trail into a foggy ravine, do not follow it. Turn around. Run if you must. Because out there in the dark, the bones still sway in the branches, the wind still sighs, and Marnie Cray still waits. I escaped with my life, but my friend did not. And the part of me that believed the world was safe is lost forever, buried under that cursed tree